Chapter 1931. Li Jianyue's innocent and cute words made the adults around them laugh. Li Xiqing deliberately put on a straight face and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't be rude." However, Li Jianyue wasn't afraid at all. She was grinning from ear to ear. Li Mosun pulled Li Jianyue and said, "Ursu, let's go back first. Daddy has to take care of mommy and little brother here. Let's go back and play with little Su." Nanny Rong also came up and said, "Ursu, let's go. Don't make trouble here." Li Jianyue was a little reluctant, but she still pouted and said, "Okay, then when will daddy and mommy come home? Nanny Rong, why don't you stay here and teach Xiqing? Mom, you can bring the children directly back to the old mansion." Su Qianxi's voice was soft as she looked at Qin Shuhua. "Yes, Mom, I think so too." Qin Shuhua heard that and nodded. "Okay, in that case Nanny Rong can stay here. I'll bring the two children back first." After the discussion, the place was much quieter. Nanny Rong smiled and looked at Li Xiqing. "The children's skin is more tender. Be gentle." Li Xiqing's movements were very gentle. When he heard Nanny Rong's words, he didn't dare to use any force. Nanny Rong couldn't stand watching him being so careful. She said, "Let me do it. Watch me. You'll be able to learn it next time." There was a training center for parents before, but Li Xiqing was busy with work and it wasn't his first child, so he hadn't been there. One reason was that he didn't have time to come again, and the other was that he was embarrassed. Nanny Rong's movements were very smooth and looked gentle and fast. Li Xiqing watched carefully. Su Qianxi looked at her man and her eyes softened. When Li Jianxian and Li Jianyue spoke, Li Xiqing was not by her side. Although he didn't say it, Su Qianxi knew that he must be very regretful. This time, the harder he tried to make it up to her, the more Su Qianxi felt guilty. Back then, Li Xiqing disappeared for 4 years because he wanted to protect her. Li Xiqing seemed to feel Su Qianxi's gaze and looked over. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes curved slightly. Then she turned her head and watched Nanny Rong's movements. "Did you see it clearly?" Nanny Rong glanced at him. Li Xiqing nodded and said, "I think so. I'll try." Little Moyun's eyes were wide open as he stared at Li Xiqing. Li Xiqing couldn't help but reach out and touch his little face. "Call me Daddy." Little Moyun immediately opened his mouth and his face turned red. Then he opened his mouth and burst into tears. Su Qianxi laughed out loud, but Li Xiqing panicked and said, "Why does this child cry?" Nanny Rong tried not to laugh. "That's what kids do. Go on." Li Xiqing wiped his little butt and carefully put a diaper on it. Nanny Rong couldn't stand it anymore. "Hurry up. How's the class going?" Sweating, Li Xiqing took a deep breath and tried to move faster. But in the end, she was still afraid of hurting the child, so she couldn't get up no matter what. Perhaps little Moyun was tired from crying. After a while, he closed his eyes and fell asleep with tear stains on his face. Finally putting the diaper on, Li Xiqing wiped his hands, his face covered with sweat. Nanny Rong said, "Put on the child's clothes. Don't let him catch a cold." Li Xiqing did as he was told. Although it was clothes, it was actually a layer of swaddling clothes. I have to explain that I was out the whole day, and when I came back I realized that 60 chapters had been deleted. Because it was an anti-pornography campaign, the deleted chapters should be sexual ones. Chapter 1932. He put the child on the small bed next to him and asked Nanny Rong to take care of him. Only then could Li Xiqing wipe his sweat. Su Qianxi still didn't look too good. Li Xiqing sat by her bed with a little heartache and said, "You've worked hard, my wife." Su Qianxi pursed her lips and smiled. "You've worked hard too." Hearing that, Li Xiqing blushed inexplicably. He coughed and said, "Are you tired? Sleep for a while." Su Qianxi smiled and responded softly. Nanny Rong saw that and said, "What are you sleeping for? Eat something first and preserve your strength. Otherwise you'll be exhausted." Then she picked up the tonic soup and said, "Have some soup first. Sir, feed madam some." "I don't want to drink it." Su Qianxi looked at Nanny Rong. "I'm sleepy." "No, you must drink it." Nanny Rong was rarely so firm and strict. "If you don't drink it, don't even think about sleeping." Seeing Nanny Rong like this, Su Qianxi had no choice but to sit up. After drinking some soup, Su Qianxi couldn't stand it anymore and fell asleep on the bed. Seeing her asleep, Li Xiqing stood up and walked over to the child. Looking at little Moyun's sleeping face, his mood quietly started to become better. His son was born and he had watched him. Honey, I want to eat something sour and spicy." "Oh Ming. You bastard, you're hiding my ice cream again." "Tcho, where's my waist pad?" Oh Ming had been very busy recently. It was said that pregnant women were difficult to handle, and he had experienced it firsthand. Not only did her taste change, but her temper was also volatile. Ming couldn't handle this kind of situation at all. The residents had sent an extra nanny. Ming had to go to the company during the day and come back at night to accompany his wife. It was fine when Lily was in a good mood, but when she was in a bad mood, Ming didn't have a good time. Honey, where's my candy? Lily had lost something for the umpteenth time, and then looked at Ming with a face full of grievance. Ming was used to it. He looked at her and said, "You can't eat candy. You have to exercise more." Before she was pregnant, she was only 40 pounds at her fattest. With a height of 1.6 meters, this weight was quite thin. But after getting pregnant, not only did her belly get bigger, but her whole body also swelled up like a balloon. Now Lily weighed 110 kilograms. Her whole face was round and she had a big belly. It was hard to imagine that she used to be thin. The last few times you went for a prenatal checkup, the doctor told you to exercise more. Your blood sugar is a little high, so you're not allowed to eat sweets. Lily looked at him and pouted as she asked, "Do you think I'm fat?" In the past, when she was skinny, he despised her for being too skinny. Now that she was fat, he despised her for being fat. Could they still play happily? When Ming heard that, he snorted. "Why did you ask if you knew?" He pulled his wife over and said, "I've fed you until you're full. Come, let's take a walk outside. Don't eat any more." "But I want to eat candy, just one." "No. At a time like this, I can't spoil you. Mom is coming over later and it'll be time for dinner. Let's go for a walk first." Lily's eyes lit up. She smiled and said, "Yeah. When is Mom coming?" Chapter 1933. Lily took Ming's arm and said, "Oh, she is your mother. Since she is your mother, she is my mother. Why are you jealous? It's so boring." Ming glared at Lily but soon turned his head and said, "I have to ask Mom to make less delicious food later. It will be difficult to give birth." "No," Lily said indifferently. "Anyway, I am ready for a cesarean section. It is very painful to have a natural birth. Qian had a natural birth this time. I heard that it is much more painful than a cesarean section." Ming glanced at her and his lips curled up slightly. Because they were all pregnant, several expectant mothers had created a WeChat group. Among them, Lily was the group leader. There were 4 women in the group: Yuyu, Su Chenxi, Qiumanyu, and Lily. Qiumanyu was a military doctor, so she didn't spend much time in the group. However, Su Chenxi often shared her mother's happiness with them, as well as the things that a mother needed to pay attention to. Lily was very open in the group. After listening to Su Chenxi and Yuyu's teachings, she didn't take Ming's warning seriously at all. Ming was helpless, but he couldn't help but feel happy for her. Although she came a little late, she was still Lily's best friend, wasn't she? In the end, Ming dragged Lily out of the door. Although it was a walk, Lily didn't want to walk at all. Her footsteps were very slow. Ming waited beside her and he also looked very slow. Lily was waiting for him impatiently, and then she would ask to go home and wait for Qiao Ziqing. However, Ming not only didn't show any impatience, but also looked at Lily with interest. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "Why don't you walk?" Lily pouted and walked slowly. She didn't want to walk at all. Looking at Ming, she said, "Honey, I am tired." "But you walked less than 300 meters, Ming said. We walked out of the house and it is a full 500 meters. It is so far. How long do you want me to walk?" Lily said bitterly. Her face was wrinkled and she looked at Ming pitifully. Ming stood beside her looking very calm. "No, it's only about 200 meters. Let's go." "I don't want to go. My legs are sore." Seeing Lily acting so coquettishly, Ming couldn't bear to see her like this. He said, "Let's head home." Lily's previously bitter face immediately brightened up. She said, "All right, hubby. Mom should be here soon. Let's go home and wait for her." With that, she let go of Ming's hand and walked home with light footsteps. Where was the look of someone who looked like he was about to die after taking 2 steps? Ming stared at her back and followed her helplessly. "Didn't you say you were tired?" Yes, so I have to hurry home and sit down or I will be exhausted." Lily looked serious and looked at him with a bright smile. Lily was out of breath as she quickened her pace. The baby in her belly seemed to be a little unhappy and gave her a kick in the belly. Lily stood still and looked at her belly. She exclaimed in surprise, Ming, come and see. Your son is kicking me." Ming wasn't far away. When he heard that, he quickly ran over and shouted, "Where?" Chapter 1934. Ha ha. Yu Lily looked at Ming gloatingly. When Ming saw Yu Lily's expression, he gritted his teeth and said, "If you give birth to a son, I'll beat you up. If you dare to beat my son, I'll beat you up." Yu Lily put her hands on her hips and looked at Ming with arrogance. As she spoke, she swaggered in the direction of her home like a local tyrant. After the new year, the weather was particularly good. For the past few days, the sun had been shining brightly. The weather was clear, and Yu Lily's mood was naturally better. Recently, Ming had strictly controlled her diet. He even restricted her from eating more than one piece of meat. Therefore, Yu Lily looked forward to Qiao Ziqing's visit every day to break her taboos. When Qiao Ziqing arrived, she led Nanny Zhang to prepare a large table of dishes for Yu Lily with a smile. Yu Lily ate with great enthusiasm. Although most of the dishes were Nanny Zhang's handiwork, without Qiao Ziqing, Yu Lily would not have been able to eat so much. After eating, Ming wanted to take Yu Lily for a walk. Yu Lily felt a wave of discomfort in her stomach. At first, she thought she wanted to go to the bathroom. After hiding in the bathroom of the room and sitting for a while, he felt that something was wrong. The pain in her stomach was getting worse and Yu Lily couldn't take it anymore. She held onto the door and walked out, shouting, "Help!" Everyone was busy working and Ming was talking to Qiao Ziqing. When he heard Yu Lily's cry, he immediately panicked. He quickly ran up and saw that Yu Lily was about to cry. He asked, "What's wrong?" "My stomach hurts." Yu Lily looked at Ming with a pitiful look and clutched her stomach. Ming was shocked. He quickly went up to hold her and asked, "Is the baby about to go into labor?" "But it's not the due date yet." Nanny Zhang heard the movement from below and ran up. She said, "Lie down first. Don't worry." "Why are you lying down? What if you give birth later?" "It won't. There are still 7 or 8 days before the due date. The closer it is to the due date, the lower the fetal position will be. It's normal to have a stomach ache. Lie down for a while. If it still hurts later, we'll go to the hospital." "Really?" Ming found it a little mysterious. Nanny Zhang glared at him and said, "I have experience. You can't go wrong trusting me." "Yes. Some things, it was always right to believe in the older generation." He helped Yu Lily lie down. As expected, Yu Lily quickly fell asleep. Ming breathed a sigh of relief, but he was also speechless. Walking out, Nanny Zhang looked at Ming and said, I was right, wasn't I?" "Yes, I fell asleep." Ming laughed bitterly and took out a cigarette. "Thank you." Nanny Zhang glanced at him and said, "Don't stand on ceremony with me. But it's best if you don't smoke anymore. It's not good for pregnant women and children." "Well, I don't smoke." Ming put the cigarette in his mouth and sat down on the sofa without lighting it. After smoking for so many years, it was impossible for him to quit just like that. But for the sake of his wife and children, Ming had been much more well-behaved recently. "Mrs. has gone back. Young master, the next time Mrs. comes, don't let her buy so many ingredients. It's not a waste, but it's not good to let Lily eat too much." Chapter 1935. Nanny Zhang glanced at her and said, "Hurry up and coax her. The labor pains before childbirth are also very uncomfortable, especially for those who have never given birth before. I'm afraid she can't take it." Ming had already stood up and walked over. Yu Lily was lying on her side on the bed with a painful look. When she saw Ming coming over, she said, "I think I'm going to give birth. Honey, I'm bleeding down there." Ming was shocked. He looked down and saw some bloodstains. Not many, but there were some. Yu Lily wanted to get up, but her stomach hurt badly. Ming picked her up and hurried downstairs. "Nanny Zhang, help me get the key. I'll take her to the hospital." Yu Lily was wearing a pink cotton nightgown. Nanny Zhang took a look and saw the patch of red behind Yu Lily. She exclaimed, "Oh, there's blood." She found the car keys for Ming and opened the door for him. "Hurry up, it'll be troublesome if your water breaks." Yu Lily's stomach hurt badly. "Didn't you say that the due date is still a few days away?" "It's only a few days away. The baby is full term, so it doesn't matter which day it is." Nanny Zhang comforted him and helped him open the car door. After letting his wife in, Nanny Zhang said, "I'll go and lock the door. I'll take care of Lily. Let's go to the hospital together. A crude man like you won't know anything." "All right." Ming agreed without even thinking about it. After Nanny Zhang locked the door, she hurried to the back seat. The pain in Yu Lily's stomach became more and more unbearable. With a bitter face, she said, "I'm never going to have another child again." "Ba ba ba." Nanny Zhang smacked her lips and said, "Don't say such things now. Don't scare the child too much to come out." Yu Lily grimaced. "But, it was really painful. It hurt so much." Halfway down the road, Lily suddenly felt water flowing down. But strangely it didn't hurt as much now. Lily leaned on Nanny Zhang, gasping for breath. There was a layer of sweat on her forehead. "Oh, young master, oh, hurry up. If you don't hurry up, how can I make it in time? My water has broken." "What?" Oming's face suddenly changed. He accelerated the car to its maximum speed. In the blink of an eye, he had already run several red lights. He didn't know where the information came from, but it was almost instinctive and deep-rooted. He believed that if her water broke and she hadn't been sent to the hospital, then it was a very serious matter. Oming's heart was getting more and more flustered. He had to drive fast, but he had to drive steadily. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Oming carried Lily out. His face was pale with fright. He yelled, "How can there be so much blood?" Lily's nightgown was stained red. It looked bloody and wretched. Red liquid continued to drip down from the Ferrari and flowed down to the ground. Lily's expression didn't look too good. Suddenly, Oming thought of the past. Didn't the television dramas and movies she watched with Qiao Ziqing when she was young have the female lead bleed to death during childbirth? "Don't worry, this isn't blood." "How can it not be blood? Do you think I'm blind?" Oming roared. He ran to the hospital with a pale face and shouted, "Doctor, doctor." When he was sent to the emergency room, the nurse took a look and wrote down a record. She said, "Send her to the delivery room to open the cervix first." Then she looked at Oming and asked, "How long has her water broken?" Chapter 1936. Hearing such fierce words, the nurse was speechless. She explained helplessly, "Mr. O, it's not all blood. The pregnant woman's water broke and mixed with blood looks a little scary, but in fact it's normal." When Oming heard that, his brows furrowed deeply. He was skeptical. "And your wife's is relatively normal. There's nothing special. Don't worry, leave it to us. You wait here." As she spoke, she had already registered and turned to follow Lily's bed. Nanny Zhang felt helpless and amused and said, "Master O, you sit here. Women don't give birth so quickly." "No, I want to go in." "No, it's bad luck for a man to go in when a woman gives birth." Nanny Zhang held Oming back. "You can't go in." "Why not?" "When second brother's wife gave birth, second brother also squatted in there for a long time." Oming was not convinced and shouted, "How can that be the same? Second brother's wife is having a second child. When second brother's assistant gave birth, her man also went in with her. That's because she didn't have an elder to guide her. She doesn't know that it's actually not good for men." Oming asked, "Nanny Zhang, why did I bring you here?" Nanny Zhang was speechless. By the time Qiao Ziqing arrived, a long time had passed. Oming had signed the papers and his heart was burning with anxiety. Nanny Zhang held him back. When she saw Qiao Ziqing coming over, she said, "Madam, quickly stop Master O. This guy always wants to go in. How can a man go in when a woman is giving birth?" Hearing that, Qiao Ziqing immediately went up to Oming and said, "No, you can't go in. If you go in and distract Lily, if the child doesn't come naturally, it's all your fault." Hearing that, Oming finally became obedient. But soon, Oming began to refute and said, "Then why can second brother go in to accompany his wife to give birth? His wife gave birth to a second child, so she has experience and strong willpower. Your wife gave birth to a first child." Qiao Ziqing analyzed the situation seriously and looked at Oming. "And don't you know your wife? Maybe she was born fine. What if you go in and she starts wailing like a ghost and howling like a wolf? When that happens, she'll really be distracted. How are you going to play?" Oming was convinced. He pursed his lips and said nothing. Staring at the door, Oming sat on a chair outside. He waited from afternoon to night. With a cigarette dangling from his mouth, Oming was extremely anxious. Staring at the door of the delivery room, she stood up repeatedly and paced back and forth. Looking at the time, it was already past 8 in the evening. Oming felt more and more uneasy and said, "Why isn't it done yet?" Nanny Zhang glared at him and said, "How can a woman give birth in a hurry? Some women give birth for a week." "1 week?" Oming's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, you really don't believe me. There really was a woman who gave birth for a week. It was a little uncomfortable, but at least she gave birth to the child. How are you going to eat and drink for a week? How does she get up?" Oming couldn't imagine it. Doesn't the pregnant woman feel uncomfortable? Chapter 1937. Oming was speechless. Actually, he wasn't in a hurry, but Nanny Zhang's words made him even more nervous. Oming took the cigarette out of his mouth and twirled it in his palm. "It's been so long. Is you Lily hungry?" "Don't worry. She can't even wait to give birth. She won't feel hungry at all. Nanny Zhang's words made Ming feel even more anxious. Qiao Ziqing saw Ming's expression and said, Nanny Zhang, don't scare him. Lily is in good health. Who knows, she might give birth soon. Don't worry. Yeah, Ming replied calmly. His pacing back and forth became more and more irritated. They waited until 9 p.m. when Huijin came over and said, it looks like she won't be out for a while. Hurry up and eat something. Your health is more important. Qiao Ziqing glanced at Ming and saw that he was extremely nervous. Ming clenched his fists and paced back and forth. It was as if he hadn't heard Huijin's words. Qiao Ziqing called out to him and Ming suddenly raised his head. Ming, go eat first. Ming glanced at them and said, you guys go ahead. I'm not hungry. I'll wait here for you Lily to come out. Wait for you Lily, not wait for the child. It seemed like there were only a few words different, but the meaning was worlds apart. Qiao Ziqing was both relieved and distressed. Huijin said, we'll bring some back for you later. No need. I'll wait for her to come out and eat together. Ming glanced at them. Mom, is it really painful for a woman to give birth? It's very painful. Qiao Ziqing glanced at him. You didn't feel any pain when your mother gave birth to you. Now that your wife is giving birth, you're like this. How realistic. It was a simple joke. Ming couldn't laugh at all. He twitched his lips and waved his hand. Hurry up and go. I'll let you know when she comes out. Huijin and his wife saw this and left with Nanny Zhang. Ming paced back and forth outside many times. It was not until 11 o'clock in the evening that the door of the delivery room was opened. Ming's eyes lit up. He quickly went up and asked, how is it? Congratulations, it's a little princess. Little princess? Little princess. Ming was ecstatic and shouted, a girl? Princess? My God. He stepped forward and took a look at the baby in the swaddling clothes, but he quickly looked away and said, where's my wife? She's inside. Someone will push her out. I'll take a look at the child first. She'll be transferred to another ward later. The nurse held the child in her arms and looked at Ming strangely. Aren't you going to hold your daughter? Okay. Ming reached out his hand, but his eyes kept looking inside. Can I go in and see my wife now? Wait a minute, why don't you hold your daughter first? The nurse leaned over. Do you want a wife instead of a child? Ming was a little embarrassed as he looked at the red-faced child in front of him. Soon, his eyes overflowed with a sincere smile. He hugged Zhang Shen carefully. Be careful, the pregnant lady is coming out, make way. There was the sound of wheels being pushed. Ming immediately looked away and saw Yu Lily on the delivery bed. He quickly walked toward her. Chapter 1938. Ming quickly stood still on the spot. Looking down, he saw the child in his arms who had his own blood. A smile appeared on his face as he looked at the slightly wrinkled little face. Then he carefully followed. Yu Lily had already fallen asleep and was lying on the bed. She didn't look well. His phone rang and Ming jumped in shock. He quickly turned off the sound and placed the phone by his ear. Hello, Mom. Where are you? I heard that you've recovered. I brought some soup for Lily. Ming gave Qiao Ziqing the room number and quickly and carefully sat down with the child in his arms. He had never liked children since he was a child. Other than Li Xiqing's 2 children, he had never been close to any other children. Ming had never seen such a small child before, let alone held one in his arms like this. Ming couldn't help but laugh. He wanted to tease the child, but the little child had been sleeping with his eyes closed. He was very quiet. You're acting like a fool, a soft voice said, and Ming immediately raised his head. Yu Lily glanced at Ming and said, it's a girl. Yeah. Ming's face bloomed with joy. I like girls. As if she understood Ming's words, the baby in the swaddling clothes moved and opened her eyes. A pair of clear eyes looked a little swollen, and her little mouth was slightly pouting. Her pink cheeks were even more pleasing to Ming's eyes. Our daughter is so beautiful. Ming held the baby and said, come, call me daddy. Yu Lily laughed and said, if I call you now, you'll be scared to death. Ah. Ming laughed happily. He looked at his daughter and asked, why aren't you crying? Yu Lily was speechless. Are you hungry? Mommy went to get you something to eat. Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Ming reached out and touched Yu Lily's forehead. Why is it so cold? I'll get you some hot water. Give me the child. Yu Lily held out her hands. Ming looked at the child and then at the water dispenser not far away. He reluctantly handed the little baby in his arms to his big baby. Ming placed the child by the pillow and stepped forward saying, Sit up first. Come on. Lily only felt a pang of pain. He helped her sit up carefully and he put a few pillows behind her. She held the child in her arms. His small, weak body and big, clear eyes clearly told Lily that she had given birth to a little life of her own. It was a wonderful feeling. Lily suddenly felt that she had matured a lot. The corners of his lips curled up unconsciously as he asked, "What's our daughter's name?" Smile. Ming was pouring water. When he heard this, he turned around and laughed like a fool. "I've been thinking about it for a long time. I was just waiting for you to wake up to tell you. Her nickname will be Xiao Xiao. I'll think about her real name later." "Yes, Xiao Xiao." However, as soon as he shouted, Xiao 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 suddenly struggled and started crying. "Wow, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" Ming walked over with a glass of water. "Don't you like the name? Then Daddy will get another one." Chapter 1939. Huajin came in with 2 thermos flasks. They looked very large. Qiao Ziqing was in front, her eyes fixed on her precious granddaughter. A smile bloomed on her face as she said, "Oh, you're so pretty. You look like Daddy and Mommy." Her little face turned even redder from crying, and her little hands and feet moved. She didn't have much strength, but Qiao Ziqing was even happier when she heard that. She said, "Hurry up and drink some soup. The child is going to be hungry." Huajin placed the bowl on the table. Ming went forward to open the lid and help his wife drink the soup. Lily had no strength at all. She leaned against the side of the bed and didn't want to move. She said, "I have no appetite." "No, you have to drink some." Qiao Ziqing's tone was firm. She didn't allow any room for negotiation. Giving birth is like taking a trip to the gates of hell. If you don't drink some, it'll be troublesome if something happens to your body later. Be good and replenish your energy before you go back to sleep. You'll recover faster that way. Lily pouted, but she still took the bowl of fish soup from Ming's hands and took a sip. She didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but she didn't feel anything when she wasn't drinking. Now that she had a mouthful of soup, her stomach started to feel hungry. Qiao Ziqing glanced at it and said, "Eat some fish and other nutritious dishes." "Mom, did you forget to add salt again?" Lily held the bowl. The more she drank, the more tasteless it became. "It's so bland. You can't have salt." Qiao Ziqing carried the child. "I'll get the nurse to ask for some milk. Hurry up and feed the baby some milk later." Lily's face fell. "Why don't I just feed the baby? Isn't breast milk the most nutritious? You have to be able to produce milk first. I'm afraid there's no milk now." Qiao Ziqing carried the baby and walked out. Nanny Zhang had already left work. Huajin looked at the time and said, "It's getting late. Ming, stay here and take care of your wife. I'll get Auntie Qing to take care of her later. She'll stay in the hospital for a few days before going home to recuperate. Your mother's health isn't good. I'll take her home first." Ming was speechless. Lily drank the soup and nodded. "Okay, then let Aunt Qing come here quickly." "Dad, I don't think Ming can handle it. I don't trust the special nurse." "All right." Huajin looked at Lily and smiled kindly. "Thank you for your hard work." Lily was a little embarrassed and said, "I'm a woman, let's go. Take care of your wife." Huajin patted Ming on the shoulder. "You don't have to go to the company for now. If I can't handle it, I'll pass it to you." "Dad, there are a lot of things you can't handle." "Impudent." Huajin glared at him, but he quickly chuckled. "Sleep early. Good night, Dad." Lily waved. "You're in good spirits." A nurse walked in. "How do you feel? Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" The nurse did a simple check and left. Qiao Ziqing came back with the baby in her arms. However, the baby had already fallen asleep and seemed to have eaten his fill. "I bought a breast pump. You can give the baby milk after you pump it out." "Yes, Mom," Ming said. "Also, the special nurse will be here in a while, but you must take good care of the baby. I'll get Auntie Qing to come over as well. She'll be here later." "Yes, Mom," Ming said. "By the way, Lily." Chapter 1940. This was the first time that Lily and Ming had become parents, so they were unfamiliar with many things. For example, changing the baby's diaper, feeding the baby, and waking the sleeping baby up to drink milk. Everything seemed novel and inevitable. After staying in the hospital for 5 days, Lily's condition was much better. After leaving the hospital and moving to her home, Lily felt a lot more relaxed. The baby had always been sleepy. Apart from eating all day, he only slept. He spent very little time awake. At one point, Ming thought that his child might be a fool. However, when he heard that it was normal for newborns to be sleepy, he was relieved. Yi Qianqian and Yu Lili hadn't seen each other for a long time. When she heard that they had a daughter, Yi Qianqian was very envious. She went to Oming's house with Shenjilia and brought a lot of gifts. Yu Lili was still in her confinement period, so Oming's mother was very strict and didn't allow Yu Lili to leave the room. Shenjilia couldn't see her at all, and Yi Qianqian was too embarrassed to enter their bedroom, so she simply played with the child in the living room. The newborn child was covered in a layer of pink, and her skin was so transparent that her blood vessels could be seen. Xiao Xiao's skin was very white, just like Yu Lili. She looked beautiful and obedient. Her eyelashes were long, and her eyes were closed as she slept. Yi Qianqian's heart was about to explode. She's so cute, old Shen. Yi Qianqian hugged Xiao Xiao. She looked so much like Lily. Shenjilia glanced at the child's face, which obviously hadn't grown up yet, and asked, "How can you tell? They both have 2 eyes, 2 noses, and 1 mouth?" This small face was very young and tender. The features looked small, but when put together, there wasn't much recognition. Yes, they look alike. Yi Qianqian looked left and right and confirmed. Look, they look like Oming too. Look at the nose. Oming's nose is very high, Shenjilia said. The nose hasn't grown out yet. How can you tell? Yi Qianqian glared at him and said, "Can't you have a little imagination? Look at the shape of the nose. It's so similar to him. The eyelashes are so long, so similar to Lily's. Look at the mouth. It's small and also like Lily's." Shenjilia replied, "Well, if you say so." Oming stood to the side and watched them bicker. He snorted and came forward to carry his daughter back. He said, "Of course my daughter looks like me. It's said that daughters take after their fathers. I can't tell now, but when she grows up, she'll definitely be a beauty." "You don't really look like a beauty." Shenjilia leaned back on the sofa. "Lily, on the other hand, is quite pretty." "Well, your future children can't look like you. Yi Qianqian is quite cute. If they look like you, they'll be ruined." Oming didn't even raise his eyebrows as he teased his daughter. "Don't you agree, Xiao Xiao?" Yi Qianqian laughed and said, "Oming, why don't you move Lily somewhere else? I'll go talk to Lily." "Go in. It's fine. There's nothing to hide inside." Oming glanced at her. Xiao Xiao was born less than a week ago. So, they can't have sex. Chapter 1941. Yu Lili had long known that Yi Qianqian was coming. Oming came in to inform her. She even changed her clothes and combed her hair to make herself look clean and tidy. Unexpectedly, Yi Qianqian still hadn't shown up. She had just sat down on the bed in disappointment when she heard a knock on the door. Oming had entered the room and made some noise, but he would never knock on the door. Only Yi Qianqian would knock on the door at this time. Yu Lili's eyes lit up and she said, "Come in." Sure enough, the door opened. A head popped in. When Yi Qianqian saw Yu Lili, she smiled brightly. "Qianqian, my God, you've become prettier." Yu Lili looked as if she had seen a ghost. She covered her mouth and said, "You've lost a lot of weight." Yi Qianqian subconsciously touched her face and looked at her body. She said, "No, it's just your imagination. How long has it been since you last saw me?" "It's true. You've lost weight." Yu Lili stepped forward and pinched her chin. "You used to have 2 chins, but now, get lost. You're the one with 2 chins." Yi Qianqian slapped her hand away in annoyance. Yu Lili laughed and reached out to pinch Yi Qianqian's chest. "Watch, they've grown bigger." Yi Qianqian blushed and quickly closed the door. She covered her chest and said, "Are you done yet? Aren't you ashamed?" TSK. Yu Lili stared at her. "Why is your skin so thin?" "Oh no, it's all over. Love really makes people vulgar." "You've changed. You're the vulgar one. You've changed," Yu Lili said with a pained expression. "Shenjilia has trained you to be such a little woman. It's so scary. Why didn't I know he had such tricks up his sleeve?" Yi Qianqian's face darkened. "Why are you getting more and more shameless? You used to be more like a little woman than me, but now you're like a hooligan." "How am I a hooligan? How did you lose so much weight? Did you lose weight?" As Yu Lili spoke, she brought out a stool for her. Yi Qianqian sat down and shrugged. "No. I just learned to keep fit from Shenjilia some time ago. I stopped eating snacks and started exercising." F***ck, this isn't considered losing weight? Yu Lili was envious and jealous. She pinched the flesh on her waist. "Look at how fat I am. You're different. You've already given birth to a child. It's normal for you to be fat. If I want to have a child, I have to train my body a little better." Yi Qianqian was a little envious. "Do you think fate really exists in this world? Of course. Yu Lili blurted out. When she saw the complicated expression on Yi Qianqian's face, she immediately corrected herself and said, "For this kind of thing, it exists if you believe it, and it doesn't exist if you don't. Why do you ask? Did Xinjilia's grandmother read your fortune before? What did she say?" "Me?" Yu Lili thought about it and said, "She said that my fate before I was 25 years old wasn't very good. After that, my luck changed. I think it was quite accurate." "Didn't she say that I might be infertile? Even the doctor said that the possibility of me getting pregnant wasn't very high. But when she read my fortune, she said that I would give birth to a son and a daughter. After the wedding, I found out that I was pregnant." Yu Lili shrugged her shoulders and looked at Yi Qianqian. "Did the old lady read your fortune again?" Yi Qianqian suddenly felt like crying. Yi Qianqian could be said to have seen Yu Lili's fate from the perspective of a bystander. Chapter 1942. It was so accurate that it made her hair stand on end. Sometimes Yi Qianqian felt that she was overthinking things. But it turned out that it was better to believe in such things. One look at Yu Lili showed that it was true. When Yu Lili saw Yi Qianqian's expression, she knew. She asked curiously, "What did she say?" "Sob." Yi Qianqian felt uncomfortable and said, "She said that I might not live past 28 years old. That I'm short-lived." Yi Qianqian hadn't even told Yi Zhenhua about it. She was afraid that the old man would worry. Apart from Xinjilia herself and the blind uncle, only the Xin family knew about it. Now Yu Lili was one more person who knew about it. Indeed, when Yu Lili heard that, her eyes widened and she said, "No way. How is that possible? You don't look like someone who's short-lived." Yi Qianqian looked at her with grievance. "What you think is useless. I think I'm doing very well. But there seems to be a turning point in the future. She said that I might be infertile or that I might die early or something else. But that kind of thing is probably not very accurate, right?" Yu Lili coughed and said, "Yes, it's true if you believe it. If you don't, it's not true. Old Mrs. Xin is a bit like a fraud. I don't think it's very reliable." "Yeah." Yi Qianqian agreed. "I think so too. Under such circumstances we can only wait and see. Anyway, I don't really believe it." "You shouldn't believe it." Yu Lili glared at her. "When are you getting married?" "Marriage? It's still early. March 5th. There's only a little more than a month left. It's not early. You have to be mentally prepared. Getting married is very tiring." "I know." Yi Qianqian yawned. "I'll take it one step at a time. I'm so tired." "Why? Xinjilia didn't let you sleep?" Yu Lili smiled ambiguously and gently touched her. Yi Qianqian blushed and said, "Are you going to die? How can you say anything now?" "It's nothing. We're all adults. Who doesn't know that?" Yu Lili smiled. "But have you gone to the hospital for a checkup? Didn't they say you might be infertile? Didn't you go?" "I went to see a doctor. Everything is normal, but I can't get pregnant." Yi Qianqian rested her chin on her hand and was a little puzzled. "I've always calculated the danger period and the safe period, but I still haven't gotten pregnant." "No protection?" "No." Yi Qianqian still felt a little embarrassed to answer such a question. Her cheeks were slightly red. Yu Lili could tell what he was thinking. She laughed and said, "Your skin is getting thinner and thinner. Xinjilia is really something. His methods are really impressive. He's managed to train our tough girl to this extent." Yi Qianqian was speechless. "But according to what you said, both of you are planning to get pregnant, and there's nothing wrong with your checkup. Could it be that Xinjilia?" Yi Qianqian widened her eyes and looked at Yu Lili. She had never considered this possibility. Xinjilia would have a problem? Oh. How could there be any problems when he was so energetic and lively, as if he couldn't wait to kill her in bed? However, doubt was like a seed. It was easy to implant and slowly it began to take root and sprout. After verbally denying the possibility, Yi Qianqian was a little distracted when she got home. Xinjilia finished cooking and called out, "It's time to eat. I'm so sleepy. I can't take it anymore. I'll go to sleep first." Chapter 1943. After placing the last dish on the table, Xinjilia untied his apron. Yi Qianqian sat on the sofa. When she looked up, she saw Xinjilia carefully arranging the bowls and chopsticks. Good man, good man. But, ever since she had returned from Yu Lili's place, Yi Qianqian had felt that something was wrong. She had been with Xinjilia for a long time. Except for the time in the beginning, she had not deliberately used contraception. But even after such a long time, Yi Qianqian had not shown any signs of pregnancy. There was nothing wrong with her body. It had been checked. Then, the more Yi Chanshan thought about it, the more likely it seemed. She stood up and went to the kitchen to wash her hands. As she washed, she thought about how to tell Shinjilia. Shinjilia had already filled the bowl with rice. When he saw that she was a little distracted, he asked, "What's wrong?" Yi Chanshan quickly came back to her senses and said, "Nothing." Shinjilia sat down and placed a bowl of rice in front of her. "Are you in a bad mood? Did you get upset at Yu Lily's place today?" Yu Lily had given birth to a daughter, but they had not done anything. Yi Chanshan didn't know, but Shinjilia himself was quite upset. Yi Chanshan glanced at Shinjilia and pouted. "How could I be upset? I just feel that there is something." "What is it? What is it?" Yi Chanshan didn't know either. But if she said it, would it affect Shinjilia's mood? But if she didn't say it, Yi Chanshan felt that it would affect her mood. Thinking about it, she felt a little depressed. Yi Chanshan didn't answer. Shinjilia frowned and asked, "What is it?" She quietly looked up at Shinjilia and found that he didn't look too good at the moment. He reminded her, "I feel that if I say it, it might affect your mood." It was rare for Yi Chanshan to be so hesitant. Shinjilia looked at her and didn't know whether to laugh or be annoyed. After a moment he said, "Go ahead." Yi Chanshan picked up the bowl and took a bite. She chewed the rice in her mouth and whispered, "I'm thinking about the problem of the child." Shinjilia relaxed and said, "Ha." Actually, he had already guessed it. Yi Chanshan had been unhappy and distracted ever since she returned from work in the afternoon. It was most likely because of this matter. It was expected. Shinjilia took a sip of soup and waited for Yi Chanshan to continue. Unexpectedly, Yi Chanshan widened her eyes and looked at him. She asked, "Didn't we go for a checkup earlier? There's nothing wrong with my body, right?" "Yeah," Shinjilia replied. It was as if he already knew what she wanted to say. Raising his eyes, he stared at her. Yi Chanshan felt as if she had been seen through. He coughed lightly and said, "Then we haven't used any contraceptives for so long, and we still haven't gotten pregnant. I'm thinking, is there something wrong with your body?" Shinjilia paused in the act of eating and put the bowl down. The delicious soup in his mouth suddenly became unpleasant. Sure enough, it was a sentence that affected his mood. He put down the bowl and looked at Yi Chanshan. "Did you hear it from Lily?" Yi Chanshan smiled awkwardly and didn't reply. Chapter 1944. Yi Chanshan quietly lowered her head and drank the soup. She didn't dare to look at him. It seemed to be a very unkind thing to have such doubts about a man. "Then what did you answer?" Shinjilia stared at her with curiosity in his eyes. Yu Lily's imagination was even more wild than Yi Chanshan's. If Yi Chanshan hesitated or admitted it, then in her eyes her man's dignity would be lost. Shinjilia felt a little bad. When Yi Chanshan heard that, she coughed softly and said, "How could I answer? I said it was impossible and then Lily didn't say anything else." "Oh." Shinjilia nodded. Yi Chanshan felt even more uncomfortable and said, "I think we can go for a checkup or something. Do we need to?" Shinjilia stared at Yi Chanshan. A pair of amber eyes, especially scorching. Yi Chanshan was scared by his gaze. She looked away and said, "I think? Well, let's eat." Shinjilia had a strong feeling that if he let Yi Chanshan speak again, he would be even more upset. After eating, Yi Chanshan obediently went to wash the dishes. It was rare for a day when she didn't take the initiative to speak. She didn't even make a sound. Shinjilia sat on the sofa and sent a message to Luo Ran. "If a man is infertile, how do you treat it? I heard that Luo Ran has been a lot more obedient recently." "Seems to be true." Luo Ran quickly replied. "Luo Ran." Shinjilia. "Luo Ran, you are infertile?" Shinjilia. "Luo Ran, F***ck, you didn't do anything outside, did you? Why are you infertile?" Shinjilia. "No, it's just that my woman hasn't been pregnant. She suspects that it's my problem." Luo Ran. Shinjilia saw the string of symbols and felt even more annoyed. He replied, "Tell me what to do." Luo Ran. "Well, men generally don't have this kind of situation unless it's congenital. Did your father and brother have this kind of situation?" Shinjilia subconsciously thought of Shin Luo Un. Although he wasn't married, the number of women he had impregnated was indeed more than his. He replied, "I don't think so." Luo Ran. "That's right. Your brother is very experienced. Even he is fine. How could something happen to you?" Shinjilia. "Luo Ran, go to the hospital for a checkup. Didn't you say that your woman is fine? If it's really you, then your woman will be wronged." "Ah." Shinjilia. Finding Luo Ran was the wrong decision. Shinjilia threw his phone on the sofa in frustration. Then he saw that Yi Chanshan had already tidied up the kitchen. Shinjilia walked forward and saw Yi Chanshan walking out with her head lowered, not daring to look at him. Taking her hand, Shinjilia pressed her down onto the sofa. Yi Chanshan was shocked. Just as she was about to speak, she was forcefully suppressed. Today Shinjilia seemed to want to prove something. He was fast and ruthless. Most importantly, it was very, very, very long. Yi Chanshan couldn't take it anymore. Panting, she called out, "Shinji, let's go to the hospital together tomorrow." Shinjilia panted and leaned into her ear. "Let's go have a look." You, slow down." Yi Chanshan was sweating profusely and on the verge of tears. Chapter 1945. They went to the hospital early in the morning to register. Yi Chanshan sat by the side the entire time. Shinjilia's series of checkups took almost an hour. When he was well, he didn't look too good. They walked to the hospital's garage together. Shinjilia got into the car and said, "There was a female nurse who took advantage of me just now." Yi Chanshan couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing. Shinjilia pursed his lips and glanced at her. "It's true." Yi Chanshan quickly comforted him and said, all right. Don't be angry. You shameless nurse." Was a man. Yi Chanshan laughed even louder. Shinjilia glared at her and Yi Chanshan stopped laughing. Shinjilia drove away unhappily. He was in a bad mood. Shinjilia pursed his lips and didn't say a word. He soon arrived home. It was rare for Shinjilia to be like this. Yi Chanshan followed behind him in silence. They went upstairs and returned home. As soon as Shinjilia entered the house, he went straight to the bathroom. After taking a shower, he saw Yi Chanshan sitting on the sofa and pounced on her. Yi Chanshan felt as if she was facing a formidable enemy. She immediately shouted, "Stop!" Shinjilia didn't listen. He took off her clothes and said, "Men who are infertile will have sexual disorders." Oh, sexual disorders? That didn't exist. Yi Chanshan felt as if she had died and come back to life again. The day passed in a daze. When she woke up, Shinjilia wasn't by her side. When she walked out, he was sitting on the sofa looking at the computer. It was dim and the lights weren't on. Shinjilia was wearing a thin shirt and sitting cross-legged. Yi Chanshan walked over and hugged him from behind. Shinjilia's body was very cold, from his body to his face. He gently placed his big hand on the back of her hand and kissed it gently. Yi Chanshan glanced at his computer screen. There was a case on it. She could tell that it was the patient's information. "Are you busy?" Yi Chanshan's voice was very soft, but it broke the silence in the empty space. "Yeah," Shinjilia replied in a low voice. "Are you hungry? Let's go out to eat." "I'm not hungry." Yi Chanshan felt a little guilty. She asked, "Do you want some noodles? I'll cook some noodles for you." "You're going to make me eat noodles?" Shinjilia glanced up at her. Yi Chanshan was taken aback. She blushed and said, "Cook noodles?" Shinjilia chuckled and quickly replied, "Sure." Yi Chanshan released him and took out a coat from inside. She tossed it at him and said, "You won't freeze to death. Put it on." The corners of Shinjilia's lips curled into a smile. He quickly put it on and seemed to have thought of something. He said, "By the way, I'm going back to the capital tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "Yes, I'm going back to work." Shinjilia straightened his clothes. "Come to the capital in 2 weeks. We'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau." "Sure," Yi Chanshan replied without hesitation. Everything had been arranged. Just complete everything according to the schedule. As Yi Chanshan cooked the noodles, she suddenly felt like a married woman. The way she was now, could she be considered a good wife and loving mother? The two of them ate the noodles and slept in their clothes. During the day he was restless. At night, Yi Chanshan was on high alert and refused to let him touch her again. Shinjilia laughed to himself, but he didn't make any more moves. The next day when Yi Chanshan woke up, Shinjilia was already gone. Chapter 1946. When Yi Chanshan returned to the office, she was extremely busy. Within a few days she received Shinjilia's checkup report. The report was simple. There were no problems. Everything was normal. The sperm survival rate was higher than that of a normal person. However, she couldn't conceive a child. When Yi Chanshan sent the picture to Shinjilia, he replied with a smiley emoji with a few words, "This is fate." Sigh. This is fate. 2 weeks was neither long nor short. Yi Chanshan had already booked a ticket. When she got off the plane, Shinjilia was already waiting for her outside the airport. When she saw Shinjilia, Yi Chanshan almost pounced on him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and said with a smile, "I'm here." Shenjulia's eyes were filled with affection. He held her in his arms and took her luggage. The two of them quickly went down to the garage. "Have you eaten?" "I just had an airplane meal. It was terrible." Shenjulia smiled. "If you're not hungry, let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau first and then find Mom and Dad for dinner." Yi Qianshan secretly clicked her tongue and said, "That's so sudden. Have you arranged everything?" "Yeah. Grandma went to play with Grandma Dongfang recently. She won't be back for a while. Don't be afraid." When Yi Qianshan heard that, she relaxed a little and said, "All right then. Let's go." Shenjulia had already made a reservation before he came. When he arrived, he didn't have to wait in line and went straight to get the certificate. When Yi Qianshan received the 2 red booklets, she still felt a little surreal. The marriage certificate was simple. On the red cover, the words "Marriage Certificate" were embossed in gold. There was only a thick piece of paper inside with their photos and names. But it was so simple that it felt like a dream. "We're getting married?" Yi Qianshan looked at Shenjulia. "That's so sudden." Shenjulia raised his eyebrows slightly and pulled her into his arms. "It's too late to regret it now. You're already mine." Yi Qianshan blushed slightly and whispered, "I've always been. We have a certificate in the future. Your name is written on my household register. You can't run away." Shenjulia lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead. "Let's go. Mom and Dad are waiting for us. When I see your parents later, what should I call them?" "Call me Daddy and Mommy. Call me whatever I call you." Shenjulia retrieved the car and started it. When they arrived, Yi Qianshan realized that there were quite a few people there. All kinds of relatives that she had seen and not seen before were gathered together. There were at least a dozen of them. Yi Qianshan felt a little uncomfortable and asked in a low voice, "Why are there so many people?" "Grandma said that we should have a small celebration first and invite the others in March. On March 15th we will go to Yun Town to celebrate again. Only then will the wedding be over." "So many? Which one is the official one?" "The 5th of March. That's the best day." Shenjulia planted a gentle kiss on her cheek. The people around them who saw it were in an uproar. Yi Qianshan's face turned red and she didn't speak for a long time. Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shen had been waiting for them for a long time. When they saw Yi Qianshan, they waved at her. "Qianshan, come and sit here." Yi Qianshan wanted to greet him, but she couldn't change the way she addressed him. After holding it in for a long time, he still couldn't utter a single word. Shenjulia could tell that and whispered, "It's okay. Take your time. Let's go over first." "Okay." Chapter 1947. A simple family dinner was considered a simple and formal meeting gift between relatives. However, it was just a meeting. After the meal, Yi Qianshan followed Shenjulia back to the Shen residence. As soon as they entered the Shen residence, they heard the crying of a baby. Such a sound was particularly jarring in a family with no children at all. Yi Qianshan looked at Shenjulia and asked, "Where did the child come from?" The corners of Shenjulia's mouth turned up slightly, but he didn't answer immediately. He walked in with Yi Qianshan and immediately saw Nanny He holding the child and coaxing him. Yi Qianshan hadn't seen many children, but this child didn't look like he was just born. He was at least a month or two old. Yi Qianshan leaned forward and looked at him curiously. She asked, "Whose child is this?" Nanny He smiled and said, "Young master's child." Yi Qianshan was shocked and immediately understood. She looked at Shenjulia, who nodded at her and said, "You guessed right." Yi Qianshan gasped and said, "How could she agree to send the child over?" Shenluo was a jerk. As a husband and a man, Yi Qianshan didn't think he was a success. Could such a person really take care of a child? "Where is she?" Yi Qianshan asked. Shenjulia just glanced at her and said, "I don't know. My brother said she died." "How is that possible?" Yi Qianshan couldn't believe it, but at the same time she felt a little sad. Shen Manting's fate was really not good. She met Shenluo and an old Mrs. Shen. Sigh. "I don't believe it either." Shenjulia sighed softly. "Do you want to hold the child?" Yi Qianshan wanted to hold the child, but she didn't dare to. It was Shen Manting's child. Shenluo's child. But after staring for a while, she couldn't help but reach out and take the child. The child couldn't stop crying. His little face was red from crying and his voice was loud. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Yi Qianshan stared at the child and squeezed his little hand. Miraculously, the moment Yi Qianshan squeezed, the child's crying became a little softer. As if curious, he opened a pair of wet, dark eyes and stared at Yi Qianshan. "He's so pretty." Yi Qianshan looked at the baby in her arms, and a smile spread across her lips. The boy's name is Shen Yueshao. Shinjilia looked at the child. What do you think about the name Grandma gave him? That sounds good, Yi Qianshan exclaimed. You mean beyond? Yes, Xiao, who is brave and skilled in battle. It's really not bad. Did Grandma come up with this name? I don't know. Shinjilia stared at him. The child was already here when I returned to the capital, but Sister Manting didn't come back. You didn't see him? No. Shinjilia was a little self-deprecating. My brother said she's dead. Where can I find her? Yi Qianshan was silent. She found it hard to believe. Shin Manting wouldn't die so easily, right? January 25th, sunny. During the new year he came to visit me with more than a dozen bags of tonics. Without my permission he entered the rented apartment without permission. I didn't dare to go home and I got soaked in the rain. My stomach hurts, it's all because of this bastard. The 27th of January rain. Her stomach hurt for a long time but the baby still came out. It's a boy. It's said that children born during the new year have the best lives. They won't be at a disadvantage in terms of age. They'll live a full life. Fortunately, the baby is very healthy and didn't get sick because of my malnutrition. Chapter 1948. What is the purpose of a person's life? If she asked this question, perhaps no one would know the answer. Shin Manting asked herself this question over and over again. What is the purpose of living? But after thinking about it for a long time, she still couldn't figure it out. But she didn't dare to die. She was like a gambler who had nothing left. She had risked everything but in the end she still lost everything. Originally she wanted to give birth to the child and use it as a bargaining chip to threaten Shin Luo. Even Shin Manting herself didn't know what exactly she wanted to force him to do. However, the longer she got pregnant, the less she thought about it. As his belly grew bigger and bigger, his desire for this child grew stronger and stronger. When she saw Shin Luo, and again she suddenly realized that she had done something wrong. She shouldn't have kept the child in the first place. She thought that she would be cold to the end. The child was a bargaining chip and a means. But she didn't expect that in the end, it would become a shackle that tortured her. January 28th, there will be a thunderstorm. Baby, I was wrong. No one will take care of you and no one will take care of me. I'm running out of money. The nurse said that they can't take care of you. I'm useless. I can't give you milk. I'm sorry that you're hungry. The weather is getting worse. I can't take it anymore. Shin Manting lay on the hospital bed. Her face was pale. She stared at the soft tube that was constantly pumping water into her body. Suddenly she smiled gently. The baby lay in the crook of her arm, sleeping peacefully. But the pain in her lower body made her feel hopeless. Shin Manting, it's time to eat. The nurse called out. Perhaps it was because her voice was too loud, or the thunder that sounded at the same time was too shocking. The baby in her arms suddenly twitched, then opened his mouth and cried. Shin Manting felt a little weak. She gently patted the baby's back, slowly and gently. Shin Manting endured the pain and sat up. She lifted the hem of her clothes and wanted to feed the baby. However, after the baby sucked on his soft lips a few times and realized that there was nothing there, he began to cry loudly again. The nurse rudely and impatiently put down the table. She placed the food on the table and went to call the next person. Zhang Chunhua. Hey, let me do it. In the same ward, a simple and honest man took the lunchbox from the nurse and said with a smile, "Thank you, nurse. You're beautiful and kind. Thank you." The nurse's face looked much better. She silently handed over an extra egg. The man laughed even more happily and said, "Thank you, thank you." Then, holding the bowl of rice, he turned to his wife and said, "This nurse is really nice. Come, have an egg to feed our baby. A newborn baby needs nutrition the most." His gentle and honest voice was not pleasant to the ears. But at this time, it was enough to warm the heart of a woman who had just given birth to his child. Tears welled up in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and sat up, shielding the crying baby in her arms. After breaking the eggshell, he peeled it off bit by bit and slowly ate it. When a child cried, the other children in the ward were inevitably affected. Soon the other child began to cry. A woman with a bad temper had given birth to her third child. Chapter 1949. His voice was full of resentment and harshness. She hugged her child and coaxed him. She murmured, "Good boy, don't cry. Wait for Daddy to come back and hold you." Shin Manting was silent. She chewed the egg in her mouth and swallowed it slowly. But the boiled egg was too dry and Shin Manting almost choked. She forced herself to swallow it and reached for her glass of water. However, the water in the cup that she had asked the nurse to get was gone. She drank the last mouthful and finally felt a little better. However, the child in her arms was sobbing uncontrollably. When Shin Manting saw her blushing face, she couldn't help but feel aggrieved. Tears welled up in her eyes. She raised her hand and slapped her little face. She shouted, "Be quiet." But the child in her arms did not calm down. Instead, he cried even harder. The other mothers in the ward looked over. Shin Manting acted as if she didn't see it. She swallowed the last mouthful of the egg and then grabbed the chopsticks to eat the food in the lunchbox. It was terrible. It was really terrible. But Shin Manting still took big mouthfuls of food. Her vision was blurred, and her throat was sore from choking. Shin Manting's stomach was still not full after the last mouthful of food. She pulled the curtain up and directly lifted her clothes to feed the child. The child sucked a few mouthfuls and was quiet for a few seconds. But soon he struggled and cried again. He took a deep breath and tears fell. Shin Manting didn't say anything. She hugged the baby and gently coaxed him. After a while, she let him suck again. After she finally calmed the baby, Shin Manting finally lay down exhausted. She closed her eyes and fell asleep with the child in her arms. Suddenly, Shin Manting loosened her arms and trembled. Someone was stealing the child. As soon as this thought flashed through her mind, Shin Manting's entire body tensed up. She opened her eyes abruptly and saw a man. A young man. His hand was reaching toward her arms as if he wanted to hold the child. "You're awake." Shin Luo, Anne's voice was very low, and she couldn't hear his emotions. Shin Manting relaxed, but she immediately reached out and snatched the child back. Seeing that the baby was safe and sound, she stared at Shin Luo, and vigilantly. Shin Luo, and glanced at his watch and said, "Are you hungry? I'll buy you something to eat. Wait for me." "I don't need you," Shin Manting finally said. Her voice was hoarse from a prolonged drought. "I have food to eat." "Don't throw a tantrum with me," Shin Luo, and said in a displeased tone. He turned around and walked out the door. When he came back, he was holding a thermos flask. He opened it, tested the temperature and said, "Drink some water." Shin Manting hadn't drunk water for a long time, and her mouth was extremely dry. Seeing the thermos flask, he subconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. However, he couldn't do it no matter what. She turned her head away to avoid looking at him. She carefully placed the infant beside her. Shin Luo, Anne's face tightened. "Are you trying to starve your child to death by not drinking water? When he wakes up, he won't even have a sip of milk. Isn't that pitiful?" Shin Manting gulped again, averted her eyes, and extended her hand. The water temperature was just right. Shin Manting drank so quickly that her throat hurt. But at least he had quenched his thirst. She handed the cup back to him, wiped her chin and asked, "What do you want?" Chapter 1950. Everyone knew. Shin Manting's heart was as clear as a mirror. But go back with him? She looked up at Shin Luo-han. In her heart, there was only resistance. If she went back with him, what awaited her would be endless torture. She had finally managed to escape and he wanted her to go back? Dream on. It's fine if you don't go back. Get discharged first. I'll hire a nanny to take care of you. Shin Luo, and stood tall and looked down at her. "I want to see the child, but Jilia brought his girlfriend home recently and I can't get away." "Oh," Shin Manting replied. "Then go take a photo." Shin Luo, and looked at her with a sullen face and said, "It's best if you go back with me. Do you think that's possible? I'm old. To be fair, I treat you well." "Yes, but someone treats me badly." Shin Manting lowered her head. "Go. You don't have to worry about me and the child. This is my child. Don't you have any shame?" Shin Manting glared at him angrily. "When did my child become your child?" Shin Manting didn't lower her voice. Many people in the ward looked over. Shin Luo, and didn't seem to care and said, "If it's not my child, who did you have it with? The heir?" "I had it with someone else." Shin Manting clearly felt all kinds of gossipy gazes coming from around her. She was a little angry, but she quickly whispered, "I don't want to talk to you about this here. Go away." "Well, then I'll get you discharged." Shin Luo, and turned and walked away as he spoke. Shin Manting was annoyed and said, "Shin Luo, and why are you so nosy?" However, Shin Luo, and had already walked away as if he hadn't heard her. The other mothers in the ward looked at each other. Shin Manting clearly heard the mother in the next bed say to the mother in the other bed, "I thought she was pregnant before marriage. Turns out she has a man. That man is quite handsome. Why is he like this? He's also nice. He didn't wake her up. He stood there for a long time, but as soon as he woke up, he quarreled. Sigh, some people just don't know how lucky they are. If I had such a handsome man, I would die of laughter. Shin Manting felt like she was sitting on pins and needles. She looked at the child in her arms and wanted to get up. She hadn't urinated for a long time, and the moment she got up, she felt the urge to go to the toilet. He carried the child and got up, but as soon as he got off the bed, he felt his legs go soft. She almost fell. She held onto the edge of the bed to steady herself and walked to the bathroom. There was a tray in the toilet for mothers and children. Shin Manting placed the baby on it and went to the toilet herself before she came out. As soon as she came out, she saw Shin Luo An's anxious expression. Shin Luo An's expression softened when he saw her. He heaved a sigh of relief and said, "What's going on? Why did you bring your child to the toilet? What if I accidentally fall?" Shin Manting felt a pang in her heart. As expected, a man who doesn't love you has a strange focus. He was actually worried that she would drop the baby. She pursed her lips and walked towards her bed with the child in her arms. "Let me give you a hug." Shin Luo An looked at her pink face, and his heart was filled with desire. This was his first child. Chapter 1951. I've already gone through the discharge procedures. This bed is not yours anymore. Shin Luo An looked at her. "Which things are yours? I'll pack them up for you." Shin Manting's expression suddenly changed and she roared, "What right do you have to do that? I'm the child's father. I have the right to take care of your body." Shin Luo An pulled her up. "How can you take care of your body here? Come back with me. Look at this ward. Which woman is thinner than you? How can you take care of the child if you're so thin?" Shin Manting didn't know if it was an illusion, but she heard some heartache in Shin Luo An's voice. She looked at Shin Luo An and saw that his face was unfriendly. He had lost a lot of weight compared to before. During this period of time, he had also experienced a lot of things. Shin Manting pursed her lips and didn't speak under the gazes of the gossipy people around her. Shin Luo An looked around and found nothing special. He said, "Buy whatever you need. Change your clothes. I brought you a set of clothes." As he spoke, he picked up 2 paper bags from the ground. Shin Manting saw that there was a bunch of flowers and a fruit basket on the ground. The flowers were beautiful and bright, and the fruit basket was beautiful and fresh. Shin Manting took the paper bag and saw that there was a down jacket inside. The color was beige, which used to be her favorite color. In the other bag was a slightly thin dress. She lifted it up and found clean underwear underneath. "I'll wait for you here." Shin Luo An sat down and reached out to pick up the child. However, Shin Manting didn't hand the child to him. She carried the 2 bags into the mother and baby's room and put the child down before she changed her clothes with peace of mind. She didn't dare to give the child to him. If Shin Luo An took the child away, she would really have nothing. After changing her clothes, Shin Manting glanced at her appearance in the mirror. Her face was sallow and her overly thin cheeks were slightly sunken. Her hair was messy and she didn't take care of it at all. She untied her loose ponytail and carefully tied up her hair. After wiping her face, she walked out with the child in her arms. The child had been sleeping as if he didn't feel hungry and slept carefreely. When she walked out, the other young mothers in the ward felt that Shin Manting's body had a new look. So beautiful. Clothes make the man. Hey, why do you have to be so pretentious when you have such a good man? I thought you were a girl from some family who secretly came here to give birth. That's right, you're going home with your man. These clothes aren't cheap, right? They look really good. Envious voices and secretly jealous gazes. Shin Manting accepted them one by one but didn't respond. Shin Luo An squatted down and took out a shoe box. He said, "Wear shoes. 37, right? I don't think I'm mistaken." "You're wrong." Shin Manting lowered her head. "I'm wearing a 38. But he still stretched out his leg and stepped on it. He stuffed it in but it didn't fit. She raised her eyes to look at Shin Luo An, and an uncomfortable thought came to her mind. You wore a 36 and she wore a 38. Shin Luo An probably couldn't remember who was who, so he bought a number in the middle? Thinking of this, his eyes were filled with mockery. However, she still hugged the baby tightly and refused to let go. "I want to eat." "Okay, let's go home first." Chapter 1952. Shin Luo An looked at her vigilant face and felt a little upset. After a moment of silence, he said, "I rented a small house nearby. We can stay there for the time being." Shin Manting was slightly relieved when she heard that. "Well, let's go." Shin Manting held the baby in her arms and walked forward. Shin Luo and looked at her back and moved his lips, but he didn't say anything. Although it was nearby, it was impossible to walk there. They took a taxi and sat in the back. The baby was very quiet. But when they reached the place, the baby suddenly struggled and cried. He opened his mouth and cried. Shin Manting's heart ached when she heard it. She gently patted his little body and said, "Don't cry, don't cry. Mommy will take you to sleep." Her every movement was filled with the radiance of motherly love. Shin Luo and stared at this woman deeply, and there was a strange feeling in his heart. This was his sister and the mother of his child. This strange and magical relationship made Shin Luo and feel very complicated. They opened the door and walked in together. Shin Manting found that this place had been lived before. But the furniture was relatively new, and there were fresh flowers on the table. Obviously Shin Luo and lived here. Shin Luo and had always had a little habit. There needed to be fresh flowers in the room and in the office. It had nothing to do with aesthetics. Sometimes it could be roses and lilies, which were fragrant and beautiful, and sometimes it could be sunflowers or stars. Now there was a calla lily on the table. Shin Manting glanced at it, then sat down with the baby in her arms and lifted her clothes to feed the baby. Shin Manting seemed a little embarrassed with her back to Shin Luo on. The baby stopped after a few breaths, then closed his eyes and continued to sleep. "Go to the room and change your clothes. I'll get you pajamas." Shin Luo and turned and went into the only room in the house. Shin Manting looked around and found that there was indeed only one room. There was only one room. Did Shin Luo and want to sleep with her? She was shocked and stood up subconsciously. She wanted to leave with the baby in her arms. Enough. She had enough of that kind of life. Now that the baby was just born, she couldn't support him at all. Shin Manting suddenly regretted it. I shouldn't have. She shouldn't have agreed to go with him at the hospital. Now, he had merely moved from the cage of the imperial capital to another cage. Her heart trembled and she got up to open the door. When Shin Luo and walked out with a set of clean pajamas, he saw Shin Manting trying to open the door. His face darkened and he quickly stepped forward and roared, "It's already so late, what are you trying to do?" Shin Manting froze when she heard that. Then he opened the door and walked out. However, Shin Luo and was obviously faster. He stepped forward and grabbed her hand saying, "Behave yourself. It's very windy outside. If you catch a cold and fall ill, I won't be the one suffering." Shin Manting froze and turned to look at him. It was hard to imagine that Shin Luo and was the one who had said those words. Shin Luo and felt a little uncomfortable under her gaze. He pulled her inside and locked the door. He threw the pajamas to her and said, "Change your clothes and go rest. What do you want to eat? I'll go buy it for you." Chapter 1953. Shin Luo and acted as if he didn't see her and pushed her into the room. "Where do you want to change?" Shin Manting finally reacted. She glanced at the child in her arms and walked into the room with the pajamas in her hands. She locked the door and made sure that it couldn't be opened from the outside before she put the baby down. Shin Manting looked around the room. The room was decorated very simply. She could tell that it had just been moved in. After changing into a new set of clothes, Shin Manting found that the room was warm and cozy. She touched the wall and found that it wasn't cold. She lay down and found that the soft bed was very comfortable. Shin Manting stretched her back comfortably. She was overcome by waves of sleepiness. She hadn't felt this way for a long time. She closed her eyes and fell asleep unknowingly. Shin Manting didn't know how long she had slept and was awakened by a knock on the door. The baby was still asleep. Shin Manting got up and suddenly remembered that she was no longer in the hospital. She opened the door and saw Shin Luo and standing at the door. Seeing Shin Manting's sleepy look, Shin Luo and sighed and said, "Come out and eat." "I'm not hungry." Shin Manting looked at him. "I just want to sleep." "Sleep after eating." Shin Luo and pulled her up and looked down at her feet. "Put on your shoes." Shin Manting glanced at it and turned around. She only saw a pair of shoes that she had just put on. Shin Luo and saw it and walked into the room. He took out a pair of cotton shoes from a corner and threw them on the ground. "Put them on." Shin Manting felt a little strange. After putting them on, she walked out obediently. Shin Luo and threw a warm towel to her and said, "Wipe your hands." Then he scooped her soup. The soup pot was a clay pot and seemed to be a little heavy. Did Shin Luo and bring it back like this? The strange feeling in Shin Manting's heart became stronger. She took a sip of the soup. It was Crucian carp soup. It was delicious and sweet, but it was a little hot. Shen Manting couldn't help but take another sip and soon finished the bowl of soup. Looking at the empty bowl, Shen Manting smacked her lips and felt a little unsatisfied. Shen Luo and glanced at her and said, "Don't eat too much." The rice pot was next to him. It seemed that Shen Luo and had steamed the rice himself. "Did you make this soup?" Shen Manting's instincts told her that it was impossible. Shen Luo and was used to being pampered since he was a child. He had a nanny at home and was loved by his family. He had never had the chance to cook for himself. Sure enough, Shen Luo and laughed when he heard this. "How is that possible?" "Oh." Shen Manting felt relieved. Fortunately, if it was really made by Shen Luo, and she was afraid that eating it would shorten her lifespan. Shen Luo and looked at her. He didn't know whether he should explain or not, so he said, "I asked the aunt next door to do it. I told her that my wife had just given birth, so I hired her to take care of you for a month." Shen Manting almost choked on her food. His wife. Shen Luo and patted her on the back. She didn't know what he was feeling, but he continued, "She'll be officially taking you with her tomorrow." "How much money?" "Not much." Shen Manting lowered her head and murmured, "I'll return it to you." Shen Luo An's expression darkened again. He retracted his hand without saying a word. Shen Manting didn't dare to speak. She picked up her chopsticks and ate without hesitation. The food was obviously made for pregnant women. There was little salt and oil and it was very light. Chapter 1954. Shen Manting hadn't had a full meal for a long time. The hospital fees were too expensive. She had been staying in the hospital since a few days before her due date. During this period of time she had to scrimp and save to raise the child. Therefore she didn't dare to eat or use good food. She had prepared herself for the worst. If she really couldn't afford to raise the child, she would find an old man to marry. No matter what, she had to keep the child alive first. She didn't expect Shen Luo and to come. While eating, Shen Manting suddenly felt a little sad. She lowered her head and drank the last mouthful of soup. She stood up and said, "I'm full. Call me when you're done. I'll wash the dishes. I'll go see the baby first." Shen Luo and looked up and saw that Shen Manting's eyes were a little red. He didn't say anything and watched Shen Manting walk in. Shen Manting wiped her eyes and then looked at her son. Although his facial features were not fully developed, it could be seen that he looked very much like Shen Luo An. Shen Manting gently squeezed his little hand and smiled slightly. "I bought milk powder and diapers. They're in the cabinet." Shen Luo An's voice came in, followed by the sound of footsteps. "I'll be outside. Call me if you're busy." Shen Luo An stood at the door and looked at her. "I know you're afraid of me. I'll sleep in the living room." Shen Manting's heart seemed to be hit by a few simple words. An inexplicable feeling suddenly arose. Looking at Shen Luo An, Shen Manting nodded. Shen Luo An stared at Shen Manting for a long time. He wanted to say something but he didn't. After looking at her for a while, he turned and walked out. He even closed the door behind him. Shen Manting opened the cabinet and looked at it. It was full of paper diapers, all of which were of good brands. Her heart ached slightly and she silently calculated the price. She opened the cabinet next to it, which was full of milk powder. The milk powder in the gold can was of a German brand. It was very expensive at first glance. Shen Manting suddenly felt a little tempted. She couldn't afford to give him these things. But Shen Luo An could. If the child were to live with Shen Luo An, at the very least the child would be able to eat and dress well. The child wouldn't have to be as strapped for money as she was. Moreover, Shen Luo An and the old lady really wanted this child. Shen Manting's eyes darkened as she looked at the little boy sleeping on the bed. Yes, they wanted this child. But he wouldn't want her. No matter how nicely they put it, it was just a means to take the child away. Once she handed over the child, what awaited her was probably a large sum of money. Or perhaps, it was Shen Luo An's endless abuse and violation. He loved Yu yet he married Guan Kui. Yet he spent every night with her. Shen Luo An had never treated her as a human being. To him she was just a tool to satisfy his lust. Now Yu was with Li Jinan and Guan Kui had committed suicide. Coincidentally she was pregnant, so Shen Luo An extended his evil claws to her. Shen Manting instantly became alert and straightened up. Don't be fooled by him. Shen Luo An was not a human being. She couldn't even believe that he would really treat the child well. Her heart was beating fast and heavy, and she suddenly felt lucky to have survived a disaster. She almost fell into the trap. Chapter 1955. The baby suddenly struggled and opened his mouth to cry. She touched his little butt and found that something was wrong, so she changed his diaper. She couldn't sleep until the middle of the night when she finally fell asleep. The baby woke up a few times in the middle of the night. Shin Manting didn't sleep well. The next day she was woken up by a noise. She got up and opened the door. Shin Luo and had just woken up. Did you sleep well? Shin Luo and looked at her. It's time to eat. As Shin Luo and spoke, his gaze shifted to her bed. Shin Manting was a little wary. She blocked his view and nodded. I know. Shin Luo and looked at her deeply and said, I want to see the baby. He's still asleep. Don't disturb him, Shin Manting whispered as she blocked the door. Shin Luo and seemed a little unhappy, but he didn't say anything. He turned around and left. After a while, Shin Manting walked out in her cotton shoes. Shin Luo and looked up and was a little disappointed when he saw that she didn't come out with the baby. A middle-aged woman sitting next to her saw that Shin Manting was only wearing pajamas. She exclaimed, How can you wear so little? What if you catch a cold? No, go put on a coat. As she spoke, she pushed Shin Luo in and said, Hurry up and get your wife some clothes. Shin Manting became alert and said, No need. I'll get it myself. You're still in confinement. Don't walk around. Just sit here, the middle-aged woman said. Auntie rebuked, Men are meant to be ordered around. You've already done it, so why are you asking your man to do it? Shin Manting gritted her teeth and said, But he's not. Sit down. Shin Luo and glanced at her. I'll get it. As he spoke, he stood up and walked toward the room. He opened the door and took out a down jacket from yesterday. He couldn't help but stop in front of the bed. He squatted down and looked at the well-behaved and delicate baby. At first glance, the baby's features were so similar to his. Unconsciously, a sense of satisfaction arose in his heart. Shin Luo and gently reached out his finger and touched the baby's little face. The baby was still sleeping and didn't feel anything. Shin Luo and felt that his whole life was complete. He couldn't help but grin. Shin Manting waited outside for a long time. She had a bad feeling about this. Just as he was about to stand up, he heard footsteps coming from inside. Shin Luo and came over with a down jacket and said, Put this on. Then she looked at the auntie and said, Auntie Lin, it's time to eat. Hey, you're here. Auntie Lin brought out the freshly cooked porridge and said, A woman's vitality will be greatly damaged after giving birth. You must nourish yourself. Shin Manting couldn't help but poke her head out to take a look. At a glance, she saw an unknown piece of meat floating inside. Along with a few pieces of vegetables, the appearance was really a little embarrassing. However, it smelled pretty good. Aunt Lin served Shin Manting a bowl and said, Here, try it. What is this? Shin Manting took a sniff but couldn't tell what it was. Auntie Lin did not say anything and said, Try it first. Shin Manting took a sip and said, It's sweet and fresh. Does it taste good? Not bad. Aunt Lin smiled and said, Eat more if you like it. Come, there's more in the pot. Shin Manting had a good appetite. She drank 2 bowls at once and said, It's delicious. What meat is this? It's quite smooth. Is it frog meat? Chapter 1956. Snake, meat? When Shin Manting heard this word, she suddenly felt her stomach churn. She felt nauseous. She stood up and covered her mouth, wanting to leave. Aunt Lin immediately held her down and said, Don't vomit. Snake meat is very nutritious. Come and drink some water. But Shin Manting couldn't control herself. Aunt Lin directly pressed her down and said, You also think it's delicious. It's good for your health and milk. No matter what, you have to swallow it. Shin Manting looked at her uncomfortably, but when she heard Aunt Lin's words, she still forced herself to swallow it. Shin Manting took a sip of the water that was handed to her. After a while, she felt much better. But when she saw the porridge in the pot in front of her, she felt uncomfortable. The baby was crying inside. Shin Manting immediately got up and walked inside. When feeding, Shin Manting didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the baby was eating better today. Did the 2 bowls of snake meat really work? She thought to herself, but she still felt very uncomfortable. No matter what, if she was asked to eat the snake meat again, she would definitely not eat it again. After the baby finished feeding, Shin Manting changed his diaper, and the baby fell asleep again. Shin Manting felt helpless and amused at the same time. She whispered, Just like a little pig. Suddenly she heard footsteps, followed by a knock on the door. There was no doubt that it was Shin Luo Han. Can I come in? No. Shin Manting thought. I want to see the baby. Hearing this, Shin Manting subconsciously looked at the little baby in her arms. This face was very similar to his. If Shin Luo and saw it, would he be more determined to keep the baby? Shin Manting was hesitating, but she heard the sound of the door being opened. Shin Luo and was wearing casual home clothes, and his angular temperament seemed to have softened a lot. He looked down at Shin Manting and said, "Are you asleep again?" She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she knew he was asking about the baby. But a pair of eyes were looking at her. Inexplicably, she suddenly felt her heart suddenly jump. The turbulent feeling came suddenly, and Shin Manting immediately lowered her head. She glanced at the sleeping baby and replied, "He's asleep." Shin Luo and walked forward and looked at the swaddle. "Can I hold him?" Shin Manting looked up and saw the desire and inquiry in his eyes. Shin Manting's heart fluttered and she found it impossible to refuse. "Shin Luo and Shin Luoan? You seem to have changed." She hesitated for a moment before pushing the child forward and saying, "Be careful. Don't hurt the baby." When Shin Luo and saw that she had agreed, he was overjoyed and a sincere smile appeared on his face. She reached out with both hands and gently picked up the child. The fragrant smell of milk and the soft, warm swaddling clothes were in his arms. Shin Luo and felt his heartbeat quicken. It was very clear. His gaze swept across the child in his arms. Those eyebrows and those eyes were so similar to his own. Shin Luo and felt a sense of satisfaction that he hadn't felt for a long time. He asked, "Have you thought of a name for the baby?" Shin Manting wasn't in the mood to name the baby. She suddenly remembered when Shin Luo and mentioned it. She looked at the baby's pink and tender cheeks and shook her head gently. "Well, let me think." Chapter 1957. He's going to name the baby? Shin Manting was shocked. She suddenly felt annoyed that someone was coveting her things. She frowned and reached out her hand saying, "Give me the baby." As she spoke, she took the baby in her arms. Shin Manting's voice was a little heavy. No matter how stupid Shin Luo and was, he could see that this woman was angry. Shin Luo unpursed his lips and frowned. Seeing Shin Manting's vigilant look, his good mood suddenly sank to the bottom. His gentle eyes became colder. "Shin Manting, what do you mean?" Shin Luo An's voice was not loud, but the anger hidden in it was obvious. Shin Manting heard this and shrank back. She looked up and saw Shin Luo An's angry face. She lowered her head and said coldly, "The baby is afraid of strangers. He will cry later." "Afraid of strangers?" Shin Luo An suddenly laughed. "You can make up a better excuse if you want to brush me off." "Afraid of strangers? He's only been born for a few days and you're telling me he's afraid of strangers?" Shin Manting did not speak but hugged the baby tighter in her arms. The baby was hers. The baby was hers. Even if he was the baby's biological father, she would not allow him to take him away. Shin Manting did not say these words out loud. She held the baby in her arms, but her heart was not at all confident. Shin Luo An's tone was not light, but Shin Manting's silence made him feel that it was meaningless. She gritted her teeth, stood up and turned to leave. She closed the door, making a sound that was neither light nor heavy. The baby seemed to feel something, but it seemed that he did not notice anything. He pursed his lips and then his breathing returned to normal. Looking at the closed door, Shin Manting's eyes were sore and her breathing stagnated. Her heart seemed to be hit hard by something. She looked up at the ceiling above her head. The room was quiet. February 1st, cloudy. "I don't know where Shin Luoan went, but Aunt Lin is still here to take care of me and the baby. I know that I must have angered him yesterday and he did not come back last night. Thank God, I can finally take care of the baby and have a good night's sleep. I hope he forgets me and doesn't come again." February 8th, sunny. Shin Luo and left for a week and never came back. Thanks to Aunt Lin's care, I could feel my body getting better and better. The baby was awake more and more. Sometimes he could open his eyes and look at me. He was very satisfied. "Baby, mommy loves you." February 13th, rain. The baby was half a month old. Shin Luo and was back. He looked much thinner than before. He had dinner at home but he didn't say a word to me. He just came to see the baby. She didn't offer to hug me, which made me feel strange. He went out again and I had a feeling he was going to do something that would make me very uncomfortable. Hopefully I'm just overthinking things. He finally thought of a name for the baby, Shin Yueshao. Yu as in surpassing, Shao as in ambitious and ruthless, surpassing ambitious and ruthless. Shin Manting closed her diary. Little Moon, who was sitting next to her, was staring at her with his beautiful, dark eyes. Suddenly he opened his mouth and yawned. Her face was flushed, and she clenched her fists as she looked at Shin Manting's innocent and ignorant look. Shin Manting's lips curled into a smile. She picked up the infant and whispered, Xinyueshao. Do you like this name? Chapter 1958. Shin Manting's body stiffened and she turned her head to look. Shin Luo, and was covered in dust. It was obvious that he had just come in. His eyes were a little red. He stood outside and looked in through the crack of the door. Shin Manting was shocked and reached out to close the door. However, Shin Luo unblocked the door and squeezed his way in. As soon as he came in, Shin Manting smelled the alcohol on him. After a sniff, Shin Manting was alarmed. She was shocked and shrank back with the child in her arms. She asked warily, "Did you drink?" Shin Luo and narrowed his eyes and looked a little lazy. His eyes were very red. He looked at her with a pair of indescribable eyes. Shin Manting became more and more uneasy. She stepped back and said, "Get out of the way. The baby is still here." When Shin Luo heard this, he seemed to be a little sober and took a step back. He took off his coat and hung it up. Then he walked over slowly. Shin Manting was shocked and unconsciously shrank to the corner of the wall. "What are you afraid of?" Shin Luo looked down at her with slightly red eyes. "I won't eat you." Shin Manting looked at him and frowned. Wuxiao. Shin Manting was stunned and couldn't react for a moment. "Didn't you name the baby?" Shin Manting was silent for a moment and answered, "Yes, you as in surpassing and Xiao as in ambitious." "Ambitious?" Shin Luo suddenly laughed. Shin Manting was bewildered by his laughter. She had no idea what he was laughing at. "This word is too fierce. You'd better change it." "Fierce?" "Yes." Shin Luo responded and moved his eyes to the child in Shin Manting's arms. "I asked Grandma to predict this child's fate." Hearing this, Shin Manting was shocked and then annoyed. "You're the one who has a bad life." Shin Luo glanced at her face and said in a low voice, "I don't believe it either, but Grandma said that his health may not be very good. If he follows you, he is very likely to die." "You're talking nonsense." Shin Manting was angry. "Don't try to lie to me. Even if you want this child, you have to make up a better reason." Shin Luo's face darkened and he said, "If I wanted you to hand the child over to me, I would snatch him away directly. You wouldn't be able to do anything about it." Shin Manting's voice trailed off, and she gritted her teeth in silence. "Look at you now. You don't have money or power. The only thing you have is your face. Now that you've ruined it like this, what do you have to fight me with?" Shin Luo looked at her and said with contempt, "Look in the mirror. You don't even have the capital to sell yourself now." Shin Luo's words were too straightforward. His words stabbed straight into Shin Manting's heart, and her face instantly turned pale. "What, you can't accept it?" Shin Luo looked at her and smiled sarcastically. "I'm telling you the truth. Don't think too highly of yourself. If I didn't really want to take you back, do you really think I'd want to waste my time with you?" That was right. Shin Manting knew this better than anyone else. Shin Luo was telling the truth. However, his tone was like he was humiliating a beggar who had nothing. Shin Manting gritted her teeth and sneered. "So, you can't help it now and you're angry out of shame?" The smile on Shin Luo's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and sneered, "You?" "Ah." Shin Manting sneered, but she didn't say anything. Chapter 1959. Shin Manting. The words were squeezed out from the gaps between his teeth. Shin Luo's eyes were bloodshot as he glared at her. She felt a chill run down her spine. However, after staring at him for a long time, he finally sneered. Shin Luo was even more furious, and his grip on her hand tightened. Shin Manting closed her eyes and hugged the baby tighter. Seeing her like this, Shin Luo suppressed his anger and flung his hand away in exasperation. "I'm going to take a shower. I dare you to lock the door." With that, he kicked the door open and walked out. There were no lights on outside, so it was pitch black. Shin Manting immediately stood up, closed the door and locked it. Shin Manting turned off the lights and lay on the bed with the child in her arms. Shin Luo, who was outside, heard the commotion inside. The anger in his heart somehow dissipated. He stared at the darkness around him and took a deep breath. It seemed like a sigh, but it wasn't. Childish. Shin Luo took a shower and took out the keys from the drawer. He opened the door and walked in. Shin Manting was breastfeeding the baby, and the lights were off in the room. Shin Manting was startled when she heard the door open. She looked up and saw that Shen Luo and had already turned on the lights. When he saw Shen Manting looking as if she had seen a ghost, he sneered and threw the key onto the bedside table. He took off his shoes, lifted the blanket and was about to lie down. Shen Manting was even more shocked. She bounced up and roared, "What do you want to do? Let's sleep." Shen Luo and was not ashamed at all. He glanced outside and said, "It's cold outside. It's warmer inside." Shen Manting sucked on the baby's breasts, revealing his fair belly. Shen Luo and glanced at it and felt his body heat up. Feeling a little thirsty, he turned his head away and said, "If you're done, then go to sleep. I won't do anything to you." As he spoke, he had already laid down. Shen Manting tilted her body slightly and felt her hair stand on end. She looked at him and said, "Then you sleep here. I'll sleep somewhere else." His tone was filled with lingering fear, and his voice was trembling with unwillingness. Shen Luo An's face darkened. He got out of bed and locked the door. "Sleep here." Shen Manting felt as if her heart was being pierced, and she felt extremely uncomfortable. She gritted her teeth and looked at him. Then she glanced at the infant. After standing there for a while, he felt a chill. The first month was definitely not a warm day. When the child was full of milk, Shen Manting couldn't take it anymore. It was very cold. "Give it to me." Shen Luo and reached out and glanced at Little Moon. She glanced at him, then sat down on the edge of the bed with the child in her arms. Shen Luo and didn't care. He reached out and took the baby in his arms. Shen Manting was shocked. Just as she was about to speak, she caught a glimpse of Shen Luo An's inexplicably happy face. For some strange reason, he loosened his grip and the baby was carried away. Little Moon had been born for more than half a month. This was the second time Shen Luo and had a child in his arms. Compared to the last time, the little doll was obviously heavier. Although the increase was not significant, Shen Luo and could clearly sense the changes. Shen Luo An's eyes crinkled and his heart melted. He whispered, "Daddy's little darling." Shen Manting's heart fluttered, and it felt as if it had suddenly been squeezed. Shen Luo An's face was gentle, and he looked very much like an elegant gentleman. Chapter 1960. However, only his family knew what he really looked like. No, perhaps only Shen Manting knew the true face of this man. Shen Luo and looked very gentle as he held the baby. He looked different from when he was facing her. He was playing with the baby, but the baby didn't respond at all. However, Shen Luo and didn't seem to feel bored at all. Instead, he looked very happy. "Say something else." Shen Luo and suddenly said. Shen Manting was stunned and looked at him. "What?" "Shen Yue Xiao." Xiao is in brave and good at fighting. Shen Luo and held the baby in his arms and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Shen Manting and said, "Xiao is an ambitious and fierce." His tone sounded like he was asking for Shen Manting's opinion, but it didn't seem like it. For a moment, Shen Manting suddenly couldn't understand this man's attitude. Facing his gaze, Shen Manting had an indescribable feeling. She slightly avoided his gaze and then responded. "Okay." Shen Luo An's expression softened and he said, "Go to sleep. It's getting late." He carefully placed the baby in the middle of the bed. The bed was very big. It was 2 meters long and was enough for 2 people to lie down. Shen Luo and fell asleep. She didn't know whether he did it intentionally or not, but his whole body shrank to the corner. Not to mention the distance between Shen Manting and the baby, there was still some distance between him and Shen Manting. Shen Manting's heart, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly jumped. Looking at him, Shen Luo and had already closed his eyes. "Is he afraid of scaring me?" After a long time, she got up and turned off the light. She lifted the quilt, lay down and closed her eyes. However, the sleepiness just now seemed to be an illusion. Shen Manting couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard she tried. Her mind was full of Shen Luo An. He was clearly sleeping beside her, but he kept messing around in her mind. Shen Manting didn't know how long she kept her eyes open, but she felt sleepy again. However, the baby next to her suddenly moved and then there was a small cry. Shen Manting reached out and gently patted the baby. She softly coaxed, "Little Moon, be good. Don't cry." The baby really quieted down. Shen Manting yawned and closed her eyes. After sleeping for a few minutes, the baby woke up again. The moment she opened her mouth, she began to cry. Her small hands and feet flailed about restlessly. Shen Manting swept him over and tested his diaper. When she didn't find anything strange, she lifted his shirt and started breastfeeding him. Shin Manting kept her eyes closed throughout the entire process. Habitual and numb. However, he didn't seem to be impatient at all. Shin Luo, and witnessed everything in the dark. He looked at her with a burning gaze. Shin Manting didn't notice anything. After feeding him milk, Shin Manting put down her clothes and soon fell into a deep sleep. Shin Luo, and closed his eyes again, but he didn't sleep for long before the baby woke up again. It wasn't easy to raise a child. Shin Luo, and finally experienced it. The baby woke up 5 or 6 times in one night. Every time Shin Manting woke up, she would either feed him or change his diaper. Every time he switched on the lights, his eyes would be blinded. Shin Manting felt an indescribable joy in her heart when she saw it. She unconsciously slowed down the process of changing the baby's diaper. Chapter 1961. Needless to say, Shin Manting slept even less than him. But his biological clock forced him to wake up at this time. Shin Luo, and couldn't fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. It was 6:30 in the morning. Shin Manting was still asleep. Shin Luo, and yawned, got up quietly and went to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and saw 2 dark circles under his eyes. What a mess. But he was so happy. He stared at the mirror for a long time and suddenly laughed. Are you crazy, Shin Luo-en? He reached out and tapped the mirror, then washed up. Shin Manting slept until 9 o'clock. She reached out and touched the front, but it was empty. He opened his eyes abruptly and saw that the seat beside him had long since been empty. He quickly got up and ran outside barefoot. She saw the man sitting on the sofa. Shin Luo, and was holding a diaper in his hand, and he didn't know what to do. The baby was placed next to him. His little butt was bare and there was a thick cotton pad under him. Shin Manting's heart, which had been clenched tightly, suddenly relaxed. She quickly walked up and looked at Shin Luo, and saying, the baby will catch a cold like this. But he's pooped. I have to change it. Shin Luo, and frowned and handed the diaper to Shin Manting. Shin Manting saw it and took it. Shin Luo, and consciously moved away, and Shin Manting took his place. She looked at the baby and found that his little butt was clean. Shin Manting had an ominous premonition in her heart and asked, what did you use to clean his wound? What? Shin Luo, Anne's face lit up with realization. So that's what you usually do. What else? Shin Manting was even more shocked. Don't tell me you washed him directly in the water? Shin Luo, and heard this and suddenly felt a little guilty, but he didn't say anything. Shin Manting was annoyed and hit him with the clean diaper. What if he catches a cold? Go away. She looked angry, then turned around and quickly put the diaper on the baby. Shin Manting's action was so rough that Shin Luo, and couldn't react for a moment. In the blink of an eye, Shin Manting was busy. This feeling was a little strange. Shin Luo, and actually thinks it's not bad? He looked at Shin Manting, who hadn't even washed up yet. His face was pale and he looked extremely slovenly. In all fairness, this Shin Manting was uglier than any other state he had seen before. Inexplicably, Shin Luo, and was in a good mood. Shin Manting quickly wrapped the baby up. Then she quickly picked him up and said, don't bathe the baby in the future. It'll be troublesome if he catches a cold. Shin Luo, and didn't reply. He looked at the baby in his arms. Shin Manting also realized that she might have been a little too fierce and said uncomfortably, I'll go wash my face first. Why isn't Aunt Lin here? I told her to rest today. Shin Luo, and stood up. What do you want to eat? I'll go buy it. Shin Manting asked, is the food outside edible? The food sold in these small places is very dirty. What does Aunt Lin usually do for you? Cooking porridge will take a long time. How long? About an hour, Shin Manting said as she glanced at him. Forget it. Go ahead and buy it. It'll take too long if you start cooking now. Chapter 1962. Shin Manting glanced at it and saw that it was a can of tonic. It belonged to the category of health supplements. The words on it were very conspicuous. Postpartum supplement. In other words, it was specially bought for her. Shin Luo, and handed it to her. He looked at her slightly absent-minded face and felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. He turned around and said, wait for me to come back. After leaving these words, Shin Luo, and opened the door and walked out. Shin Manting looked at his back and suddenly realized what was going on. She seemed to be more and more relaxed around him. February 14th, sunny. Shin Luo, and seems to be different. He seems to be sincere to the child. But what should I do? The days passed peacefully, and Shin Manting slowly got used to Shinluo An's existence. Shinluo An seemed to be really different from before. At the very least, he didn't do anything out of line every single day he was here. It was another morning. When Shin Manting opened her eyes, she saw a large sleeping face. Shinluo An gently placed his hand on her body and circled it around her and the baby. The baby's position was perfectly empty in the middle, and the baby was well protected. But even so, it still gave her a fright. Shin Manting subconsciously shrank back a little. This shrinkage not only woke Shinluo An up, but also startled the baby. The baby moved a little, then opened his mouth and cried. Shin Manting quickly patted him, and after a while, the baby became quiet again. But when she looked up, she saw a pair of deep and hazy eyes. Shin Manting subconsciously held her breath and looked at him. "Morning," Shinluo An said, then stretched and said, "It seems that Aunt Lin is here. I'll go and see." Shinluo An never procrastinated when he got up. Shin Manting looked at the other half of the bed in front of her, slightly absent-minded. His mind buzzed and many questions popped up one after another. Why did he sleep with me in his arms? More importantly, she didn't feel it at all. The ominous feeling in her heart grew stronger, and Shin Manting was a little annoyed. Shinluo An invaded her world day by day, and she had slowly become used to him. However, it was impossible for Shinluo An to have the patience to play house with her and play the role of the husband of this nameless family of three. His target was definitely the baby. Once she let her guard down, he could snatch the child away, right? The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Shin Manting broke out in a cold sweat because of her own thoughts. This situation was too terrifying. However, he had to be on guard. Shinluo An could really do such a thing. Shin Manting also got up to wash up, but she looked a little absent-minded. When he came out, the baby had already been carried out. Shinluo An sat on the sofa and fed the baby. The baby held the bottle with both hands and sucked contentedly. The feeling in Shin Manting's heart suddenly became stronger. She looked at them, walked over and said, "Let me do it." However, Shinluo An was unwilling to do so. He said, "There's no need for that. Go and have breakfast first. I'll take your turn later." He had a silly smile on his face. Shin Manting hesitated for a moment but didn't say anything. She turned around to eat breakfast. Suddenly Shinluo An, who was sitting on the sofa, laughed and said, "Look, our son is smiling at me." Chapter 1963. He didn't notice that Shin Manting's body stiffened slightly when he said, "Our son." Shinluo An walked over with the baby in his arms and crouched down. But soon, there was a look of regret on his face and he said, "He's not smiling anymore." Aunt Lin heard this and was amused. She rebuked, "How can such a small baby know how to smile? He'll smile with you when he grows up." Shin Manting glanced at him and her body tensed up. The strange feeling in her heart magnified and got out of hand. But Shinluo An didn't notice it. He held the baby with a look of regret on his face. He seemed to notice that Shin Manting was looking at him and he looked up at her. Shin Manting looked at him and quickly looked away. She said, "Do you want to eat? You eat first. I'll hold the baby." Shinluo An sat down next to her with the baby in his arms and said, "Have you noticed that the baby has become more and more good-looking recently? Look at his face. It's much rounder." Aunt Lin looked a little proud and said, "Of course. Mom has good food and drinks, and the baby has enough nutrition. Of course he's become good-looking." Shinluo An grinned and said, "That's true. I'll give you a bonus later." The smile on Aunt Lin's face blossomed as she said, "Thank you, sir." Everything seemed to be harmonious. Shin Manting's heart, which she had finally calmed down in the morning, suddenly began to waver again. February 28th, sunny. Her confinement was finally over. She couldn't wait to take a shower, wash her hair and change into new clothes. She felt that she finally looked like a human. I'm going to take a walk on the street. I'm going to take little Moon out to bask in the sun. The outside world, here I come. Shinluo An specially bought a small cart, but Shin Manting didn't feel comfortable leaving the baby alone in the cart, so the cart was fortunately left unused. It was the first time Shin Manting took the baby out, so she didn't dare to go far. The sun was not small outside, but because it was early spring, it wasn't so hot. The baby opened his eyes and habitually frowned under the sun. He frowned slightly and thought of Shinluo An's unhappy look. Shin Manting held the little guy in her arms and smiled. Shinluo An reached out a hand to cover the baby's face and said, "Don't get sunburned." I'm covering you, Shin Manting said with a smile as she arched her body slightly to shield the infant from the sun. Little Moon's skin is tender. It'll be terrible if he gets sunburned. Shin Manting glared at him angrily and said, the sun is so strong. Who will die from the heat? Why don't you use an umbrella? Wait for me. I'll go buy an umbrella, Shin Luo, and said before disappearing. Soon he came back with an umbrella in his hand. It was still spring and the weather had been a little humid recently. The sunlight in Jiangnan was not that strong. However, Shin Luo An's concern for the baby left her speechless. Under the curious gazes of the passers-by, he finally walked a full circle. Shin Manting was in a much better mood. For the past month, he had been cooped up in a small room all day. He was bored to death. But because the infant couldn't be left outside for too long, Shin Manting still carried him home. Aunt Lin had already prepared lunch. When she saw them return, she said, "You're back. You can eat now." But I was afraid that you wouldn't agree and I didn't want to scare you, so I didn't let them come. Shin Luo An looked at her. They're old. This is their first grandchild. I'm not young either, Shin Manting said in a low voice. This is my first child. You're also my first. Shin Luo An's gaze softened. Manting, come back with me. Go back. Shin Manting sneered. Like a parasite, I'll be imprisoned and raped by you? Shin Manting's eyes had turned red, and her eyes were filled with obvious hatred. Shin Luo An's hair stood on end when he heard such a sensitive word from her mouth. He looked at Shin Manting in disbelief as if he was looking at a lunatic. But the last word, brother, was a resounding slap on Shin Luo An's face. The baby cried even louder, as if it was crying out its mother's ruthless contempt. Chapter 1966. He was so strong that Shin Manting immediately staggered. Her body fell hard on the sofa and she almost fell. She desperately tried to steady herself before she could stand. Shin Luo An's face was full of anger. His jaw was tight and the veins on his temples were bulging. He looked at Shin Manting with obvious anger in his eyes. He grabbed the back of her neck and pressed her down, forcing her to look at the crying baby lying on the sofa. Look at your son and tell him that he's a bastard. His voice was not soft and it was filled with rage. Shin Manting's neck was pressed down hard. She looked at her son, whose face was red from crying, and desperately tried to push him away. But Shin Luo An was so strong that she couldn't move him no matter how hard she struggled. Tears fell uncontrollably. Let go of me. Shin Manting tried to pull back, but she could only grab nothing. Her hands fluttered but couldn't touch anything. Her heart was terribly empty. The feeling of despair made her scream almost crazily. Shin Luo An, you beast. You're a pervert. Shin Luo An only felt that his anger was burning. He pressed her face in the direction of Little Moon. The baby seemed to be frightened and cried even harder. He had never cried like this before. The commotion attracted the attention of Aunt Lin, who lived next door. The door wasn't locked, so Aunt Lin easily came in. She was shocked to see the scene inside. She rushed forward and shouted, Sir, what are you doing? Manting has just finished her confinement. How can you fight? Shin Luo An's anger subsided a little when he heard someone else's voice. He loosened his grip slightly and Shin Manting collapsed to the ground. Her neatly combed hair had all come loose. It stuck to her face and neck, looking miserable and disheveled. The new clothes she was wearing made Shin Manting feel that the good feeling she had for the past month was a complete joke. Her tears were like a dam that had collapsed, gurgling down endlessly. She looked at the baby in front of her as if he had lost consciousness. His expression was empty and numb. The baby had never cried like this before and his voice soon became hoarse. Aunt Lin felt sorry for him and went forward saying, Poor child. But before she could touch him, she heard a broken scream. Don't touch him. Shin Manting stood up like a madwoman and held the baby in her arms. Shin Manting broke down in tears. She hugged the baby and burst into tears. Aunt Lin had no idea what had happened, but when she saw Shin Manting in such a state, her heart ached and she was frightened. She looked at Shin Luo An blankly and asked, What happened? Why did they suddenly start fighting? Shin Luo An gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. She's crazy. You're the crazy one. Shin Manting roared, You're a lunatic. You've always been a lunatic, a devil and a psychopath. Shin Luo'an's face darkened as he walked forward. Are you done scolding me? Shin Manting was frightened. She held the baby in her arms and retreated. She immediately turned around and ran into the room. Shin Luo and quickly caught up with her, but he was still a step too late. Shin Manting seemed to have exhausted all her strength. She slammed the door shut and used her back to block it. Shin Luo and screamed in agony. Shin Manting glanced at his fingers that were still in the gap of the door. She was startled and immediately loosened her grip. When she saw that he immediately withdrew his hand, she pressed it back down and quickly locked it. Bang! Bang! Chapter 1967. Shin Luo'an's voice was very loud, and his hand was very heavy. Aunt Lin saw his bruised fingers and was shocked. She said, "Don't be too hard. You're scaring the baby. Don't scare Manting." Shin Manting heard the noise outside and sneered. Then she looked at the window in the room. The window was not high and relatively spacious. There was a fence at the back, less than half a meter inside, with beautiful flowers and plants. Shin Manting looked at the baby and put him down. She rummaged through her belongings, including her wallet, ID card, and bank card. She still had some savings from her previous job, which was enough to support her to find a new job and live for a while. She gritted her teeth and couldn't stop her tears from rolling down. Forget it. Her life would not be easy if she stayed here. Shin Luo'an would also take her child away, and she would have to live an inhuman life again. She had just given birth and he hadn't gotten the child yet. So Shin Luo'an had a little conscience and didn't force her. When the child was in his hands and she let down her guard, he would not only get a child but also a cheap sex slave. I have to go. Shin Luo'an was still banging on the door. Shin Manting roared, "You're so noisy. Don't you think the baby is crying enough?" Sure enough, the other side soon quieted down. Shin Manting calmed down a little. She took 2 bags of diapers and stuffed them into her big backpack. Then she placed the baby by the window and opened the window wide. She tried to be as gentle as possible. Suddenly, the sound of the door being unlocked came. Shin Manting was shocked. She immediately pulled the baby over and held him firmly. She immediately crouched down. But it was too late. As soon as Shin Luo'an came in, he saw Shin Manting flash past the window. His anger, which had calmed down with great difficulty, surged again. Shin Manting! Shin Manting roared. Shin Manting trembled and began to climb over the railing in a hurry with the baby in her arms. But the railing was a little high. Shin Manting tried to climb over it, but she couldn't get over it, so she immediately trotted. Shin Luo'an had already climbed out of the window and grabbed her backpack. Shin Manting screamed and shouted, "Don't touch me. Get away." "Oh!" Shin Luo'an covered her mouth and hugged her tightly from behind. Auntie Lin was on the verge of tears. He hurriedly ran out of the door and waited outside to receive them. Shin Manting cried so hard that the infant's voice became hoarse. Auntie Lin stomped her feet in distress. "Give me the baby now. If you hurt the baby, you'll die of heartache." Shin Manting's mouth was covered, but she cried even more desperately. She hugged the child tightly and refused to let go. He gritted his teeth, but in the end he gave in and said, "We're not going back to the capital. We're not going back to the capital. Give the baby to Aunt Lin first. He's your son. Are you going to crush him to death?" Shin Manting's eyes were red and swollen, and she slowly regained her composure. The baby's voice was hoarse, but he was still crying. Her face was so red that it was frightening. Shin Manting was shocked. She quickly loosened her grip on him and handed him over. Aunt Lin hugged the baby and coaxed him. Little Moon gradually calmed down, perhaps because he was tired from crying. Shin Manting also calmed down a little, but the passers-by would look at them a few times. Shin Luo'an's expression was ugly, but he was much calmer than before. Chapter 1968. He looked down at Shin Manting in front of him and tried to let go. Sure enough, Shin Manting was no longer moving. However, her whole body seemed to have lost strength and softly collapsed. Aunt Lin was shocked and exclaimed, "Manting!" Shin Luo'an reacted quickly and immediately held her in his arms. However, the weight of such a big living person suddenly fell on Shin Luo'an, and coupled with the size of a person's backpack, made Shin Luo'an stumble. "Shin Manting?" Shin Luo'an called out uncertainly, then immediately picked her up and shouted, "Call the ambulance." Shin Manting fainted suddenly without any warning. When Shin Luo'an carried her back, he saw her eyes swollen like walnuts. Aunt Lin had taken care of Shin Manting for a month. Although they were not very close, they still had some feelings for each other. Seeing them quarrel like this, she was anxious and distressed. She stomped her feet and scolded Shin Luo, a woman gave birth to your child. You can't do anything no matter how serious the matter is. Manting is not very lively. It's not easy for her to get better and be more cheerful recently, but it's all because of you. Aunt Lin was about the same age as Mrs. Shin Luo, and did not say a word in the face of her scolding. He sat down with Shin Manting in his arms and pressed her face. Hey, at least avoid the child when you quarrel. The baby is still so young. If he is scared, he may really be frightened. If anything happens to him, it's all your parents' fault. Shin Luo felt even more annoyed, but he still pursed his lips and did not say a word. Auntie Lin finally managed to coax the baby to sleep. She sighed. The ambulance soon arrived. Shin Luo put her on the stretcher and then took the baby. When she wakes up, she will probably look for the baby. I'll take him with me. Shin Luo looked at Aunt Lin and quickly got into the ambulance. After the doctor asked about the cause of the disease, he put Shin Manting on N4. But after Shin Luo explained the cause and effect, the doctor said, the new mother's mood is unstable and it may be postpartum depression. She has been avoiding you, and there is a 90% chance that it may be because of this. Yes. Shin Luo was also a medical student, and he had vaguely guessed something. He was not surprised that Shin Manting would suffer from postpartum depression. She had sealed herself up too tightly. Even the slightest bit of disturbance would feel like someone had touched her reverse scale. But during this period of time, Shin Manting had obviously improved. However, just like what Aunt Lin had said, his violence had scared away all the improvements in her. Shin Luo sat by the bed and covered his face with his hands. He sighed heavily. He was too impatient. He didn't have the confidence to take care of her and the child without Aunt Lin, so he couldn't wait to bring her back to the capital. Firstly, it was to let his parents see their son. Secondly, he wanted to give her and the child a proper status. The baby wanted to register and so did she. But now it was all destroyed. Oh. Wu, a baby's voice. Shin Luo turned his head to the side. The baby was pouting and looked like he was about to cry. He picked up the baby and saw Shin Manting twitching from the corner of his eye. She was startled and opened her eyes in an instant. There was an obvious fear on his face. After seeing him, the fear in her eyes intensified. Chapter 1969. Her movements were a little violent, and she tore the flexible tube of the infusion. Shin Luo clearly saw blood spurting out of the back of her hand. He was shocked and quickly handed the child over. Here. Don't be afraid. He didn't know if he was frightened by Shin Manting or for some other reason. The baby, who was about to cry, suddenly cried out. His voice had been hoarse from crying, and now it sounded helpless and miserable. Shin Manting's eyes also turned red, and she gently rubbed her face against her son's. Little Moon, don't cry. Shin Luo looked at the back of her hand and said, You're still on the infusion. Don't move. Get lost. Shin Manting shrank back, and half of the infusion needle that was stuck on her hand was lifted. The blood stained the back of her hand and Shin Luo's heart tightened. But he didn't lean over and quickly pressed the call bell at the bedside. The nurse soon came over. When she saw the back of Shin Manting's hand, she frowned and came forward. She rebuked, How could you do this? Do you want to die? If your blood vessels rupture, how are you going to take care of your child? As she spoke, she had already picked up the medical equipment. He looked up and saw that Shin Manting was still holding the child. The nurse had a look of disdain on her face. She laughed and said, What are you looking at? Take the child away. Don't you see that your wife is bleeding? When Shin Luo heard this, he moved forward a little. He tentatively reached out his hand, but Shin Manting held the baby tightly. The baby's miserable cries made his heart tremble. The nurse finally saw it. It wasn't that the man didn't want to hold the baby, but the woman didn't want to give it to him. You can hold the baby at any time. If your hand is crippled, you won't be able to hold the baby anymore. The nurse glanced at the back of her hand that had begun to drip blood. She secretly clicked her tongue and said, You really don't want this hand anymore? When your baby grows up and asks you how your hand is crippled, will you be able to tell him? Most of the words were threatening. But Shin Manting was still frightened. She slightly released the baby and the crying became slightly softer. Shin Luo hurried forward and carried the baby over. He gently coaxed the baby, looking like a good father and husband. Shin Manting found it ridiculous. She sneered and stretched out her hand. The blood dripped onto the blanket. The nurse frowned and said, "Sigh, there was no need to dirty the blanket. Why did you have to quarrel in the hospital? Besides, the child is here. No matter how angry you are, you shouldn't throw a tantrum in front of the child. Don't think that the child doesn't know. They just don't understand, but they will remember it." Shin Manting and Shin Luo remained silent. After the nurse was done, she applied the 4 drip on Shin Manting's other hand. "Don't ruin it again. The last bag of water will be gone after we hang it up. Behave yourself." The nurse glanced at Shin Luo and said, "Look after your wife. There's only 1 bag left. Don't argue. Your wife's health is more important." "Thank you," Shin Luo said softly. When he looked back at Shin Manting, she was already lying down. The crying of the baby in her arms had stopped, and it was much quieter. Only a pair of watery eyes were still open. His dark round eyes resembled Shin Manting's. "Are you hungry? I'll buy you some food." They didn't eat much during lunch. Shin Manting must be hungry after making such a fuss. But Shin Manting didn't respond. Shin Luo suddenly came to his senses. Chapter 1970. As soon as this thought came to her, it was like a hook stuck in her heart and she couldn't pull it out. Shin Luo sat on the edge of the bed with little Moon in his arms and said, "I was wrong about what happened today." Shin Manting had already closed her eyes, but when she heard this she suddenly tightened her grip on the quilt, and her knuckles turned slightly pale. "I have a bad temper, but I'm trying to change it." Shin Luo rarely spoke in such a humble manner. Shin Manting's restless heart suddenly calmed down a little. The original fear, hatred, and disgust. With this soft voice, they all hid away as if they had seen a ghost. Shin Manting's heart ached slightly, but she still kept her eyes closed. She clearly heard Shin Luo take a deep breath and said, "I'll try not to lose my temper in the future. The baby may be hungry, give him some milk." Shin Manting's heart was suddenly calm, as if she had suddenly seen a ghost. It was extremely sarcastic. She clutched the quilt, and there were drops of water dripping from her closed eyes. She didn't make a sound, and her body trembled slightly. The sound of low sobbing could be clearly heard, and it was restrained and soft. "You said so much, but you just want me to feed your son." Shin Luo's body stiffened, and he turned his head to look. Shin Manting buried her face in the quilt, and only a small part of her white forehead was exposed. "Shin Luo, everyone is so tired, why don't we part ways?" Shin Luo's heart suddenly sank. "I'll raise the baby and I'll pay you back all your expenses this month. Give me some time and I'll definitely pay you back." Her voice was choked and it was sullen under the quilt. Shin Luo sneered, and his voice was filled with contempt. "Can you pay me back?" Shin Manting didn't directly answer his question but said, "You forced me during those days and we have no feelings for each other at all." After waking up, Shin Manting was calmer than ever. However, the words that came out of his mouth were really more annoying than the previous one. "Whether there are feelings or not, it's not up to you to decide." Shin Luo announced in a deep voice, "Little Moon is my son, and as his father I have the right and responsibility to raise him. Do you want to take the child away? Not in this lifetime. Then I can only go through the legal process." Shin Manting had already stopped sobbing, and her voice sounded a little threatening. "You raped me and this child is the best proof." "Ha!" Shin Luo sneered. "Who can prove that it was a rape? You've already given birth to a child. If you really hate me that much, why did you give birth to him?" Shin Manting froze. He bent down and whispered in her ear, "Actually, you love me, don't you?" She was dependent on him. For a long time Shin Luo had this feeling. She hated him and wanted to break free from him, but she couldn't. Shin Manting's heart was actually a little twisted. He knew it better than anyone else. However, when Shin Manting heard this, she suddenly burst into laughter. He lifted the quilt and immediately felt a gust of hot air on his face. In a moment he met Shin Manting's red eyes. Who do you think would fall in love with a rapist? Shin Luo was shocked to see her like this. There was a thought in his mind that was trying to stop his desire to verbally attack. Chapter 1971. Have you ever heard of Stockholm Syndrome? It was a strange yet familiar term. Shin Manting opened her eyes and looked at him. It was a psychological disease. The abused developed a distorted mentality of dependence, habit, and even love for the abuser. Shin Manting used to think that it was an extreme perverted mentality. It was no exception now. But when Shin Luo mentioned it, she suddenly remembered it. She was stunned for a moment, then laughed and said, "I didn't expect you to be so good at daydreaming." Shin Luo was not angry when he heard this. He quickly stood up with the baby in his arms. The baby was still awake and didn't cry. He blinked his eyes and looked at him. He handed the baby over and said, "I'll ask Aunt Lin to bring some food." "No need." Shin Manting took the baby. "Let's take this opportunity to make things clear. Don't even think about it." Shin Luo's face darkened. "Aunt Lin's daughter is about to give birth. It's impossible for her to take care of us for the rest of our lives. The best way is to go back to the capital in a few days and get married at the Civil Affairs Bureau." "You want to marry me?" Shin Manting's pale face was a little shocked. She had never thought of this question. Marry him? She didn't even dare to think about it. "My child wants a mother." Shin Manting almost roared, "This is my child." Shin Luo looked at her for a long time and said word by word, "He also wants a father." He was unexpectedly calm. She thought that he would be furious. Shin Manting sneered. Her eyes were firm and her words were almost squeezed out from between her teeth. "Shin Luo, I can't marry you." Shin Luo didn't answer. He turned his head and turned to make a phone call. He told Aunt Lin to send food and then hung up the phone. Shin Manting held the baby and was quiet for a while. Then she lifted her clothes and fed the baby. No one spoke again. The atmosphere was unexpectedly harmonious. Shin Luo didn't lose his temper, so she couldn't make a fuss. However, this feeling made her feel uncomfortable. It shouldn't be like this. She actually wanted Shin Luo to lose his temper so that she could take the baby away and never see him again. She wanted the child, but this man was not her husband. After feeding the baby soon fell asleep. "There's no more water." Shin Luo looked up at the medicine bag above his head and pressed the call button. The nurse came over to remove the needle. After resting for a while, Shin Manting said, "Tell Aunt Lin not to come anymore. It's not over yet. Have you noticed? Your emotions are very unstable. I suspect that you have postpartum depression. Let's go to the psychiatrist together." Another new move? Shin Manting held the baby in her arms and looked at him. "You want the doctor to determine that I'm mentally ill and can't take care of the child, and then take the child away from me, right?" Shin Manting felt that her suspicion was reasonable. However, Shin Luo's face darkened even further. He sneered, "I think you're not just suffering from depression. You're also suffering from paranoia." Shin Manting didn't say anything. She looked at him coldly. Shin Luo suppressed his anger and said, "If I wanted to take the child away, I could have done so after you gave birth. At that time you were weak. If I took action you wouldn't have had a chance to resist." "I will die, so I didn't do that." Shin Luo interrupted her. His tone was a little heavy. "I will have a better chance later. After you fall asleep I will quietly take the child away. Will you know?" Chapter 1972. Yes. During this period of time she had been too relaxed with him. When Shin Luo first moved in she was still a little wary. But later she became more and more accustomed to his existence and completely let down her guard. It was just as he said. If he wanted to take the baby away suddenly she wouldn't be able to find out. Shin Luo saw her expression and laughed. "Don't think that everyone is as heartless as you. Shin Manting, no one in our family has treated you badly during your time in the Shin family. You know very well how good grandmother has been to you." "So what?" Shin Manting found it ridiculous. "You were good to me because you felt guilty. In the beginning I really treated you as family, but what happened later?" Later, when Shin Luo was drunk, he pressed her against the sink in the bathroom. He violently and heavily invaded her. After the first time there would be a second and a third time. At that time he still had a wife. She couldn't believe that he could sleep with his sister behind his family's back. From that day she knew that he was a pervert. A pervert that she had never seen before. In the beginning she felt extremely guilty toward Yi Yuyu. All she could think about was getting married. Only when she got married and was with Ming would he let her go. However, Shin Luo had imprisoned her in a dark room over and over again. He had made her do dirty things that couldn't be exposed to the light. No woman could stand that kind of life. Shin Manting still had a lingering fear when she thought of that time. Later. Shin Luo narrowed his eyes. "Did I not treat you well?" "Haha." Shin Manting sneered but didn't say anything. "I gave you whatever you wanted. I didn't have to worry about food or clothing. Except for being a little rough with you sometimes, I don't think I've done anything wrong to you. Shenluo and looked at her. Their child was lying beside her. Manting, now that we have a son, don't be angry with me anymore. Let's get married, raise little Moon together and build a happy family. Isn't that good? Shin Manting looked at him coldly. A happy family? Marriage? Except for being a little rough sometimes, he didn't do anything wrong to her? Aha! Shin Manting looked away and sneered. Shenluo An's anger, which he had suppressed with great difficulty, flared up again. What kind of expression is that? Shin Manting sneered. Don't you think what you're saying is ridiculous? Laughable? Shenluo and stared at her. I treat you with sincerity. Every word I say is true. I really want to marry you. I really want to give our child a home. I really want to give you a proper status. Is that ridiculous? I won't be with you, Shenluo and... Shin Manting looked at him with sadness in her eyes. Let me go. I'm tired. Really. Shin Manting's eyes were filled with sorrow. His eyes were slightly red and his face was pale. She was looking at him with a rare calmness. She was calm and serious. His words made Shenluo An's heart clench. Even his anger seemed to be blocked by her words, unable to go up or down. After staring at her for a long time, Shenluo An suddenly stood up. Shin Manting was shocked. Just as she was wondering what he was going to do, he suddenly turned around. Chapter 1973. Shenluo An left suddenly. For a moment, Shin Manting didn't come to her senses. Manting? It was Aunt Lin who asked tentatively. Aunt Lin came in with a thermos and looked at it. Where's sir? She asked. I don't know. Shin Manting leaned against the headboard. I'm hungry. What's here? Aunt Lin put down the thermos and poured out a bowl of soup with a lid. She said, I made this tonic soup early in the morning. There are herbs and meat in it. I'll scoop it up for you after you finish it. Shin Manting looked at the ginseng chicken soup in her hand and took a sip after a long while. Hey, it's not easy for a young couple to live together. You can't quarrel even if it's for the sake of the child. Aunt Lin tried to persuade her. When the child grows up, you'll find that it'll be over soon. Sir has a bad temper, so you should be more tolerant. In fact, he has a good heart and cares about you very much. It's just that he may not be able to say anything nice. Shin Manting didn't say anything and listened to her in silence. Manting, the baby is still young and needs the love of his parents. As a mother, you shouldn't quarrel with him in front of him, let alone hit him. When Shin Manting heard this, she suddenly felt sad. Tears welled up in his eyes uncontrollably, and they rolled down his face. Her tears dripped into the bowl, but Shin Manting laughed. In your eyes, I'm being unreasonable, am I? Shin Manting's tone was not very good. She smiled, but it was uglier than crying. Aunt Lin was speechless. After a while she said, I didn't say that, but it's impossible for sir to be so angry for no reason. You must have said something wrong. During this period of time, Shenluo An was quite good. Shin Manting, on the other hand, looked like she had seen a ghost when she saw him. Sometimes she avoided him like a snake or scorpion, and sometimes she was very natural. However, the relationship between the two of them was never intimate. It was obvious that Shin Manting was afraid of him. But Aunt Lin saw how well Shenluo An treated Shin Manting. In all fairness, Shenluo An really had no other problems except for his bad temper. Shin Manting felt even more ridiculous. But she couldn't laugh. Now even outsiders felt that she was being unreasonable. No matter what, Shenluo An always had a reason. There was a reason why he got angry, a reason why he hit her, and a reason why he humiliated her. Just because he has money? Just because he was the real employer? Shin Manting looked at the chicken soup in her hand and suddenly tilted her head back and drank it in one gulp. He returned the cup and said, Then, if he and I are destined to be separated, do you think I can afford to raise the child? Auntie Lin was shocked. Did she want a divorce? Her heart was beating like a drum. Aunt Lin guessed for a moment before she said, I think you should raise him with sir. Children need a home. No matter if it's a father or a mother, you can't have one less. I can't live with him. Shin Manting stared at Aunt Lin. He's my brother. Aunt Lin gasped when she heard that. He stared at her in disbelief as if he had seen a ghost. A pair of eyes stared into her face, trying to find some semblance of a mischievous expression. But no, not one bit. Shin Manting was very serious. When she saw the expression on Aunt Lin's face, She actually felt a little happy that Aunt Lin shared a common enemy with her. Chapter 1974. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Shin Manting sneered. We share the same surname. Haven't you ever doubted it? Of course Aunt Lin doubted it. But what could the same surname prove? There were many couples with the same surname. What made her curious was that Shin Manting had always been afraid of Shin Luo An. She had thought that there was a knot between them. But she didn't expect that to be the reason. Brother and sister? Biological brother and sister? Manting, are you kidding? Aunt Lin couldn't believe it. You don't look alike at all, and, if you are really brother and sister, why did you give birth to the child? Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid of deformity? Now the child won't be deformed. But the child born to biological brother and sister is likely to be mentally retarded, have cerebral palsy, or even have invisible diseases. Such a price was too heavy. For a child, it would be better not to have been born into this world in the first place if such a fate were to befall him. Shin Manting heard Aunt Lin's words and smiled. But at the same time tears fell. We are not related by blood. Aunt Lin immediately breathed a sigh of relief. That's good, that's good. You haven't answered me yet, Shin Manting repeated the question. Who do you think the child will be better off with? Aunt Lin frowned and said, You don't want to be with him? Who would want to be husband and wife with their own brother? Ah, how can a woman bear to give up the baby? Aunt Lin was also a mother, so she naturally understood this feeling. It was impossible to give up the blood relationship with the child. But now as an outsider, she heard Shin Manting's words and sighed softly. But in all fairness, if you are destined not to be together, then it will be better for the baby to be with Sir. That was the expected answer. Shin Manting felt like a knife was being twisted in her heart, but she still didn't give up. She asked, Why? First of all, Sir's financial ability is better than yours. As a woman, your ability to earn money is inferior to that of a man. Moreover, your health is not very good. I'm not in poor health. You are weak and anemic. These are all problems. These small problems have to be taken care of, or they will accidentally become serious problems. Aunt Lin looked at her. Moreover, the baby needs a good material life. Sir can provide these, but can you? She couldn't. If she took care of a baby, she would not have the ability or energy to earn money. Once she lost her source of income, she might not even be able to support herself. Manting, Sir is actually quite nice. I got it, Shin Manting interrupted. I got it. His voice was very low, with an indiscernible stillness. What do you know? Auntie Lin looked at her. You're still not in good health. You need to stay on the drip for a few days to nourish your body. Don't quarrel with Sir again. Yes. Shin Manting lowered her head and looked sideways at the infant lying next to her. I know. You can go back now. Aunt Lin sensed that something was amiss. Are you all right? It's okay. You can go. Leave the soup here. I'll drink it myself when I'm hungry. Aunt Lin was relieved to hear that. If he knew how to drink soup, it meant that he wouldn't do anything stupid. Auntie Lin looked at the time and said, All right then, I'm leaving. When Sir comes back later, you can ask him to talk to you. Yes. Chapter 1975. The baby was already asleep. He clenched his fists and breathed steadily. Shin Manting looked at the baby next to her for a long time before getting out of bed. After she went to the bathroom, a nurse came over and asked, Shin Manting? Yes. Shin Manting looked up at her. The nurse glanced at her and said, Go to the psychiatry department. Your husband is waiting for you there. Psychiatry department? Husband? Shin Manting smiled and replied, Got it. The nurse didn't care and turned around to leave. Shin Manting put on her shoes and walked to the psychiatry department with the baby in her arms. The psychiatry department was on the 9th floor. When she arrived, she saw Shin Luo, and standing by the window in the corridor. He reached out his hand when he saw her. Shin Manting glanced at him and then handed the baby to him. To be honest, she was also very curious about the results of the examination. She sat in front of the doctor, but the doctor didn't rush to ask any sensitive questions. Instead, he chatted with her about daily life. Shin Manting was a little wary at first, but she gradually let her guard down. How old is the baby? 1 month. I just got out of confinement. Then is the milk he's been drinking recently breast milk or mixed with milk powder? Both. Shin Manting frowned and said, But does this have anything to do with me? The doctor smiled and said, It doesn't matter. I just want to know more. Shen Manting felt a little impatient and her eyes were a little unfocused. The doctor didn't say anything and lowered his head to write something in his notebook. Shen Luo, and waited for her outside. He held the baby in his arms and felt lonely in his heart. The baby was theirs, but Shen Manting didn't want to be with him. It seemed that she wanted to leave with the baby. Shen Luo, and only felt more irritated. He looked at the distant sky and sighed. Shen Manting had been in there for more than an hour, but there was still no movement. The baby woke up but didn't cry. A pair of black eyes looked at Shen Luo, and, pure and bright. Shen Manting walked out of the room with her head lowered and didn't say a word. Shen Luo, and stood up and asked, "How is it?" Shen Manting smiled and said, "Postpartum depression and paranoia." Shen Luo, and was stunned by these two terms. Shen Manting walked around him and whispered, "Are you happy?" "What are you talking about?" Shen Luo, and frowned deeply. "How can I be happy when you're like this? Did they give you a prescription?" "Okay." Shen Manting took out a form and said, "Let's go and pay the bill." Shen Manting was behaving strangely today. He seemed to have become abnormally calm. He was terrifyingly calm. Shen Luo, and took the list and handed the baby over. Shen Manting carried the baby to the nursery and returned to the ward. She was admitted to the hospital at the last minute, so everything was at home. They sat on the edge of the bed and waited for Shen Luo, Anne's return before they went back together. It was almost dinner time. Aunt Lin had already prepared dinner. She glanced at Shen Manting and asked, "Manting, did you bring the thermos flask back?" Shen Manting suddenly remembered. "I forgot." Auntie Lin felt a little regretful. "Forget it. Let's eat. Give me the baby." Shen Manting handed the baby over and washed her hands. She picked up a bowl of rice and ate quietly. Shen Luo, and sat in front of her and couldn't stand it anymore. He said, "What's wrong with you? Tell me. Don't look so lifeless. It's an eyesore." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.